The House will be in order.
For 40 years, C-SPAN has been providing America unfiltered coverage of Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court, and public policy events from Washington, D.C. and around the country, so you can make up your own mind. Created by cable in 1979, C-SPAN is brought to you by your local cable or satellite provider. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. And we take you live now to Capitol Hill. A House Oversight Subcommittee hearing will be looking at the potential dangers of vaping after a recent outbreak of lung disease among people who use e-cigarettes. We'll be hearing testimony from the Principal Deputy Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the parent of a child who became ill from vaping. You're watching live coverage here on C-SPAN 3. I'm just waiting for this hearing, House Oversight Subcommittee hearing, to begin, looking at the potential dangers of vaping after recent outbreaks of lung disease among people who use e-cigarettes. The chair of this subcommittee, Raja Krishnamurthy. And just while we're waiting, let you know that over on C-SPAN, President Trump will be speaking shortly at the United Nations. Also, this afternoon here on C-SPAN 3, we'll be hearing from senators in a Foreign Relations Subcommittee hearing on the options for U.S. policy in Syria. That starts at 2:30 Eastern Time. And then looking ahead to Thursday, the acting director of National Intelligence will be testifying on the whistleblower complaint involving President Trump. We'll have that Thursday on C-SPAN 3, live at 9 a.m. Eastern. And just waiting for this House subcommittee hearing to begin on the dangers of vaping and lung disease among people who use e-cigarettes. We'll be hearing testimony from the principal deputy director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the parent of a child who became ill from vaping. Haven't seen the chair of the subcommittee in the room yet, Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois, but we should be seeing him soon. Also, just a reminder, over on C-SPAN Live, underway right now, remarks by the president of Brazil at the UN, and waiting on C-SPAN to hear from President Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in attendance at the UN in New York City. You can watch that on C-SPAN. While we are waiting here for the subcommittee hearing to begin, we'll take a look at some of today's Washington Journal.
California Democrat Ro Khanna joins us now, a member of the House Oversight Committee, which has been working on its own investigation when it comes to President Trump and Ukraine. We're hearing reports that Nancy Pelosi has called a meeting of the caucus at 4 p.m. today to discuss the issue of impeachment. What will you say if you have a chance to talk?
Well, we'll probably have a full attendance there for this caucus meeting. And it's a very serious issue. What I will talk about is our founders. I mean, Hamilton in Federalist 68 talks about foreign interference being the largest threat to our republic. And our founders were concerned about interference from Britain and France. This isn't a partisan issue. This is about making sure that we stand up for our constitutional republic and say it is wrong for any elected official, certainly the President of the United States, to even get close to the line of seeking foreign assistance.
Where do you think the caucus is right now on a morning when we see 7 Democratic freshmen with an op-ed in the Washington Post about this issue of impeachment, these 7 members of the military and intelligence communities before they came to Congress? Where do you think the caucus line is right now?
I saw that late last night, that op-ed, and I said to a friend, that's a game changer. These are extraordinary members of Congress. They have the most credentials when it comes to national security or military issues. They are off, many of them are in districts that Trump carried. For them to come out and say this justifies an impeachment inquiry really has changed the tenor in our caucus. You had a number of progressives like me who had called for an inquiry. Now you have moderates and people on frontline districts calling for it. I can't think of something more significant than that op-ed.
Significant enough to move the speaker to pursue impeachment investigations?
I would be surprised if she doesn't officially endorse impeachment investigations at this point. Obviously, you'd have to ask her, but given the breadth of support for that in the caucus, that would be my expectation. And of course, impeachment investigations are already proceeding. I mean, Jerry Nadler has started the investigations. My sense is you may get a more formal statement from the leadership.
A lot of focus last week and then this week as well, especially with the DNI acting director coming before the Intelligence Committee on Thursday about the Ukraine phone call. But the House Oversight Committee, which you serve on, is already working on an investigation in that realm. Remind viewers what that is and where that stands.
Well, what we did is go over the process. I mean, here is the process. When you have a whistleblower who makes a complaint to the Inspector General, the Inspector General needs to determine whether it is urgent and serious. In this case, the Inspector General did that. And then the Inspector General has an obligation to refer it to the agency head, in this case, the Director of National Intelligence. Now, under the law, the Director of National Intelligence has to provide that complaint to Congress within 7 days. Since 2010, since the statute was set up, every time there has been a whistleblower complaint, Congress has gotten the complaint, even frankly in cases that weren't urgent. And in this case, you have the Director of National Intelligence who, in blatant disregard for the statute, in blatant disregard for the Inspector General's findings that this was urgent, refused to give this to Congress. And what I was asking the Inspector General is, has this ever happened before? And he said, no. And I said, is this normal? He said, no, the statute requires the complaint to come to Congress.
Congressman Ro Khanna with us until a little after the top of the hour. You can join in the conversation. Democrats 202-748-8000 is the number. Republicans 202-748-8001. Independents 202-748-8002. We talked about that caucus meeting this morning. If impeachment proceeds, what does impeachment accomplish if Republican senators choose to line up behind President Trump?
Well, first of all, it's the constitutional duty for every member of the House and Senate to stand up for the principles of our founders. So it exposes what is going on in the corruption, and it puts every member of Congress and senator on record to say, do you believe that foreign interference is acceptable in our democracy? Do you support what Hamilton wrote in Federalist 68? Do you share the constitutional concerns of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, that the biggest threat to American democracy is foreign powers? We don't think about it as much anymore because we're the most powerful country in the world. But when we weren't in the beginning of our republic, this was the preoccupation of our founders. This was their central concern. That's why the grounds for impeachment originally were treason and bribery. Their concern was, could a fledgling republic survive without interference?
Let's chat with a few callers. Denver, Colorado's first. Keith is a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Khanna, Representative Khanna. We need to stop playing games. I'm a diehard progressive and a Democrat. And there's one word for my party right now, and it's feckless. Feckless and in fear. The way you allowed Corey Lewandowski to attend that hearing and disrespect every member of Congress, that was incredible. Now you have proof here of the president obstructing justice in real time. Impeachment is not a debate. It is obstruction. The inspector shall, which means must. It's a law. There is no debate here. If he does not turn in the complaint, the transcript would come later. If he doesn't turn in that complaint and you do not hold him in contempt or take action, you are failing and you don't deserve to be in office.
Well, Keith, I share your frustration and much of your point of view. I agree with you. This is not optional. If the director doesn't provide the complaint as is required by law, he should frankly be removed. I mean, he has violated the statute in disregard for what Congress wanted. And I agree with you. I've called for an impeachment inquiry months ago. Jerry Nadler has started the proceeding, but I do believe we need to unify the entire House caucus around that position so that there is no debate or equivocation or ambiguity.
Brad is a Republican, International Falls, Minnesota. Good morning.
Good morning, John. Quite a deal going on now, and it's really, really, really sad that they turned it up to this point. I mean, this is as far-fetched as telling the people that a spontaneous attack, a video caused a spontaneous attack on an area that was attacked twice previously, and people believed it. But on this whistleblower deal, this is that young little lady that was fired here about a couple weeks back, and she didn't even listen in to the conversation. So how can a whistleblower be a person that never even heard the call? And so
Brad, we're
just a stunt.
We're still waiting to find out more information about the whistleblower complaint. Where do you get your information about it?
You know what? It's the writing on the wall, John. They know what's coming. They really know what's in the Horowitz report, and they know what Durham's found. They are doing everything that they can right now to muddy the waters and block it, because when they come out, then they're going to stand there and say, well, you didn't do anything to Trump. And it's always, well.
Ro Khanna, do you know what's coming?
Well, we don't know what's coming, but here's how we can clarify that. We can have the president release the transcript of the call, and we can have the whistleblower complaint go to Congress so that people can evaluate it. If there really is nothing to hide, and if these reporting has been inaccurate, the president can easily clear up any ambiguity. But at this point, he has the burden to show that there was nothing improper. I mean, there's reporting about him pressuring the Ukrainian President Zelensky 8 times about Biden. Now, I know he's tweeted out to say that wasn't the case. If it wasn't the case, release the transcript. Let's see the whistleblower complaint and prove that it wasn't.
Comparisons between Congress's reaction to the Mueller investigation and the Mueller report and this Ukraine whistleblower complaint. This from Axios today, saying Ukraine is different because the Mueller investigation played out through press reports and occasional indictments over 2 years, softening the blow from the most damning revelations of that report. The Ukraine story has unfolded in less than a week. What do you think that has meant for this?
I don't think it's just the amount of time that it's unfolded in, but it's the fact that this is forward-looking. I think after 2016, it was such a ugly election, such a divisive election. There was part of the country that just wanted to move on and didn't want to relitigate what had happened, even though there were very serious violations, even though Bob Mueller was screaming that the Russians interfered. The country just said, I don't want to have that campaign go on. But it's very different when you have explosive allegations that the president may be, for the 2020 election, soliciting interference. And there's a concern if you don't say something now and take action, then are we just making 2020 open to foreign interference? And I think that's why there's such a stronger reaction to this.
Back to the line for Democrats. This is Herbie in Moss Point, Mississippi. Good morning.
Yes, I want to know why y'all doing the American people like this. It's like a tick for tack thing. When Obama was in, the Republicans did that for the whole 8 years, so he couldn't get anything done. Now Trump is in, and he's trying to get something done, and the Democrats are doing the same thing. Now, we're going with a whistleblowing thing, and we're trying to prosecute Trump. Now, we know Bush took us to war behind lies and stuff like that. Whistleblowers came out and told about the whole war situation, how Condoleezza Rice, they used Colin Powell, and they used all of these people. And these people are still coming out after these lies were told, and Obama didn't do anything to this man for destroying our economy, for taking us to war. A gentleman said the other day that China hadn't had a war since 1979, and they spend their money on their economy and their people. They're over there, and they're doing wonderful.
That's Herbie in Mississippi. On the whistleblowing process and what this Ukraine complaint means for the future of whistleblowing. It was a topic we covered a little bit in our last segment. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me first answer one of Herbie's points and then, John, get to you. Herbie, you're absolutely right. It was actually President Carter who said that China hasn't been in a war since 1979 and that we have been in 40 conflicts. So I agree with you. We shouldn't be getting into foreign wars. But this is of a different issue. And this is that you have a whistleblower who has evidence that the president of the United States may have asked a foreign country to tarnish and investigate his political rival. The key for whistleblowers is that they need to be protected. They need to make sure that there isn't repercussions against them and that they can come through this process without a fear for their safety, without a fear for their employment. And that's why we have a statute that has a step-by-step process. This was not a partisan issue. It's important to realize if the whistleblower complaint was partisan or lacked evidence, the inspector general, who is appointed by the president, would not have forwarded it to the director of national intelligence. So you had an independent person appointed by the president who said that this complaint merited being forwarded to Congress.
To Stam in Gaithersburg, Maryland, an independent. Stam, good morning.
Good morning. My name is Stan, and I'm a former immigrant from Soviet Union, and I became an American citizen in 2005. And a couple of points. First of all, I think C-SPAN is very biased toward the Democrats. That's very obvious as the rest of the press. And, being from Soviet Union, I can see all those lies from Republican side and Democrat side all together, because like Iraq war proved that, you can't trust a word that comes out of intelligence community. They're in lying business. That's why they call spies. But that's all besides the point. And I want to ask this Democrat representative, what does he know about Joe Biden? What Joe Biden was negotiated in China when his son got $1.5 billion from Chinese. And that's a question that it seems to me that nobody is caring about, especially C-SPAN or other press. And that's, I think, much more important question, what Obama knew and what Biden knew when the guy, the Biden's son got $1.5 billion. What Biden and Obama was negotiated. And by the way, can you trace the money to Obama and Biden account from this amount of money? I mean, did anybody try to investigate if any of this money got to Obama, Clinton, Biden?
Got your question, Stan.
Sam, frankly, that's offensive. And I say that as a co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign. But that kind of politics where you're launching ad hominem attacks on Vice President Biden, who dedicated his entire life to public service, who left with maybe $300,000 or $400,000 of life savings, and you have no evidence for that, and you're attacking him and his family. That's what's wrong with American politics. Stick to the issues, stick to the facts. Don't insult someone who's given their life to this country. I would feel equally if you launch those kind of ad hominem attacks on a Republican.
Taking north of the border, Montreal, Canada. Richard, Republican, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning.
Sorry for the delay. The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chairs are authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Without objection, I'd like to have a few members waived onto the committee. Congressman Jordan, Congressman Meadows, Congressman Cox shall be permitted to join the subcommittee on the dais and be recognized for questioning the witness. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. We are here to amplify the recent health warnings issued by the Centers for Disease Control related to 530 e-cigarette-related incidents of lung disease in 38 states and the U.S. Virgin Islands. First, I want to make clear that we did not plan to have this emergency hearing at the beginning of this Congress, let alone this time last month. But on August 23rd, officials from my home state of Illinois reported the first death due to a mysterious vaping-related lung illness. And since then, a total of 8 individuals have tragically died in this outbreak. In response to this crisis, CDC is warning the American public to consider not using e-cigarettes of any kind. Because this subcommittee has investigated the youth vaping epidemic and the companies behind it, we feel that it is our duty to draw attention to recent government health warnings about the dangers of e-cigarette use. The long-term health effects of continued vaping is unknown, but what we do know should give us all pause. State health departments continue to conduct retroactive analyses of patient records to better understand exactly when this outbreak began. As they do, the number of affected people will grow. Unfortunately, illness related to e-cigarettes is not new. The FDA has received 127 reports of seizures and other neurological conditions caused by e-cigarettes. When a product is released onto the market without safety testing or clinical trials, this is what we fear. This is a problem exacerbated by e-cigarette companies that make what appear to be unfounded and illegal claims that their products are safer and healthier than combustible cigarettes. People trust and rely on those claims even when there is no evidence to back them up. That is why this subcommittee wrote a detailed letter to the FDA outlining our findings about Juul illegally marketing its product as safe, healthy, and a smoking cessation device. FDA agreed with us, and days after our letter responded with its own letter to Juul declaring that Juul had broken the law. Juul's response is due next week on September 30th. After that, the FDA will have the opportunity to act. I encourage all of you to follow that development closely. We certainly will. And just days after the FDA responded to our letter, the administration, in part citing our investigation, announced that it would move to ban all e-cigarette flavors, including mint and menthol. The fact that flavors hook kids is a point this subcommittee hammered home over our 2 days of hearings in July. The administration cited our hearings in rolling out its proposal. We should all be encouraged that Democrats and Republicans are coming together when the health of our nation's youth comes under attack. Today, as we focus on the tragic outcomes of this lung disease outbreak, we must view it as another chance to come together to protect public health. At the heart of the recent vaping-related outbreak are families being blindsided. With us today is Ruby Johnson, a mother of 7 from near Chicago. This August, as she prepared to drop her oldest daughter off to start college, already a stressful time, the Johnson family faced a terrifying health scare. Instead of moving into a dorm room, her daughter moved into a hospital bed far from home, where she stayed for what would have been her first week of classes. Ruby's daughter could have died. Thankfully, she recovered enough from her bout of lung disease to be released, but she still has trouble breathing, and doctors cannot tell her how much longer that may last. Mrs. Johnson, thank you for coming to share your family's harrowing experience. We are also joined by leaders from the public health community to provide a neutral assessment of the outbreak and provide their advice to the public they serve. We have Dr. Ann Schuchat from the CDC, Dr. Ngozi Ezike of the Illinois Department of Public Health, and Dr. Albert Rizzo of the American Lung Association. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to learning more about how we can avoid more preventable deaths. And with that, I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cloud of Texas, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last several weeks, it's been clear that users of certain vaping products have become very ill, some tragically and to the point of death. Mr. Chairman, I do greatly appreciate your desire to utilize this committee's authority to get to the bottom of what's causing these mysterious illnesses. In the Center for Disease Control's Prevention September 19 update, the number of those sick reached 530 and 8 deaths have been confirmed. This is very concerning, and it is clear that we need to examine the cause and what can be done to prevent it. To the best information available, many of these cases seem linked to the use of products that present themselves to be something they are not. Based on the limited data available about those impacted by this mysterious lung illness, approximately 16% are under 18 years of age. And while each life is affected is important, these recent incidents also serve to further bring attention to what has become an epidemic increase in teen vaping, with currently 20% of high school students vaping. Add to that the decades-long epidemic of addiction to traditional tobacco smoking that will leave 5 people dead by the end of these opening statements. As a father of 3, this is very concerning. I wish we had a quick fix to ensure that each child is protected, that no American finds themselves bound by a substance, and that all of us are able to find complete personal fulfillment in experiencing the purpose for which we were created. Today, we're here to discuss what should be the appropriate response to the lung illnesses associated with certain vaping products. Complicating this discussion is a lack of scientific data and studies available, counterfeit products, untraceable supply lines, a lack of enforcement that allows players to pass the buck of accountability. For example, data available leads us to believe that many of the recently reported 530 cases involve vaping cannabinoid products. I hope today we're able to do the good work for which this investigating committee exists. I believe there's a lot of bipartisan support for addressing this situation. I appreciate the chairman's heart in this, and to the point of examining this to find the solution and our desire to end teen vaping, there is unity. Please know my heart goes out to those impacted and my condolences to those who've lost loved ones. Again, I appreciate the chairman's work on this issue and look forward to productive discussion today.
Thank you, Mr. Cloud. And I should say that we just recently started a bipartisan, bicameral anti-youth vaping caucus. And thank you, Mr. Cloud, for joining that caucus. And today happens to be National Recovery Day, a bipartisan endeavor to recognize the folks in our lives who may be affected by substance use disorders and our attempts to try to wean them off their addictions. I just hope that vaping is not that next substance use disorder. Today, we are joined on panel one by Dr. Ann Schuchat, Principal Deputy Director of the CDC. If you would please rise and raise your right hand, I will begin by swearing you in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Let the record show that the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you very much, and please be seated. The microphones are sensitive, so please speak directly into them. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. With that, Dr. Schuchat, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Krishnamurthy, Ranking Member Cloud, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about CDC's investigation into lung injury associated with using e-cigarettes or vaping products. Today, I'll discuss with you what we know and don't know and what we're doing to address this outbreak of lung injury. I'll also discuss our efforts to address the epidemic of youth e-cigarette use or vaping. I want to make 4 key points. First, as soon as we learned about the initial cases of lung injury, CDC has been working 24/7, hand in hand with the FDA and our state and local public health partners to find the cause. Secondly, our ability to do this type of investigation relies on a critical underlying public health infrastructure, including data systems that need modernization and a trained public health workforce. Third, the CDC has made important recommendations to the public, including the following. While this investigation is ongoing, people who are concerned about lung disease associated with e-cigarette use or vaping should consider refraining from using e-cigarette products or vaping. People should not buy these products off the street and should not modify them further. Adults who use e-cigarettes or vaping products because they have quit cigarette smoking should not return to smoking cigarettes. We have a need to address the epidemic of youth use of e-cigarettes, and this current outbreak reinforces the need to address the broader youth e-cigarette epidemic. So what do we know so far? As you've heard, several hundred cases have been reported from nearly all states. We've had a number of deaths. The cases are occurring in young people. 1/2 of all cases are less than 25 years old. People present with cough, shortness of breath, chest pain, and sometimes with symptoms like nausea and vomiting, fatigue, or fever. Most of the cases with information so far have reported use of either THC or THC and nicotine-containing products. Some have reported nicotine only. There may be some challenges with the histories of exposure in some subset of the patients. Well, what do we not know so far? Probably the most important thing, we don't know the cause. No single product, brand, substance, or additive has been linked to all cases. This investigation is ongoing and it's very dynamic. What are we doing to respond? CDC is working closely with state and local public health, with the FDA and clinical community to get to the bottom of this. We've deployed staff through what we call EPI-AIDS assistance to help states with their investigations. We've provided technical assistance, developed a case definition, standardized clinical guidance, and a reporting system, and are working every day on coordinating the parts of the investigation and response. We set up an incident management system and activated our emergency operations center as we do in other public health urgent situations. And we've convened the public health, clinical, and media numerous times to share what we know and don't know and how they can be part of the solution. One such example is a clinical outreach and communication activity call that we held in the past few days that had 2,500 lines active and clinicians around the country listening to the latest information. We're working very closely with the FDA on the laboratory aspects of trying to trace back and study the products from affected patients. There are challenges with this response, including the nature of the outbreak itself. Many states, some of the cases report using illicit products and may not be fully forthcoming. The marketplace for e-cigarettes is wide and diverse with a multitude of products, and it may be very complicated to tease out the problematic exposures. And our public health data collection systems are in need of an upgrade. In terms of youth e-cigarette use, we are seeing an epidemic, and in the questions I'd be happy to go into many more details about that, but our most recent data for 2019 is continuing to be concerning. I'll just leave you with this. CDC is dedicated to working around the clock together with FDA and the state and local health officials to identify the cause or causes of the outbreak, and we'll continue to update you during the course of the investigation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schuchat. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Dr. Schuchat, thank you for the work that you are doing. The CDC has been very clear that it is not yet possible to determine the cause of the vaping-related lung disease outbreak. CDC has recommended that people consider not using any e-cigarettes. From that, we gather that nothing is off the table as a possible cause. Let's first describe the general types of e-cigarettes out there. From what I understand, there are two major categories. First, there are nicotine e-cigarettes, which have been the focus of this subcommittee's hearings up to this point. And then second, there are THC e-cigarettes that replicate the effects of marijuana. Dr. Schuchat, you are examining both of those types of products as factors in the current outbreak of lung illness. And is it correct to say that you cannot rule out either as contributing to the outbreak?
Yes, that's correct at this point. We are getting new information in every day, but we think it's very important until we know more that our recommendations be broad. Separate from this outbreak, we are quite concerned about the rise in nicotine-containing e-cigarette use among youth, which is really epidemic. But for this particular outbreak, we don't know yet what the product or products are, or whether they're components of the products that might be contained in both nicotine and THC containing devices.
I want to focus on the nicotine e-cigarettes for a second. In the Illinois and Wisconsin published analysis, almost 20% of the victims there were using only nicotine e-cigarettes. And overall, 61% of the victims were using, among other e-cigarettes, nicotine e-cigarettes as well. So, Dr. Schuchat, there may be people out there who would like for this to be a THC-only problem, so that they can go back to vaping nicotine e-cigarettes. If almost 20% of victims are using only nicotine e-cigarettes, do we still need to be concerned about all e-cigarettes at this point?
At this point, I think caution regarding all products is recommended. It may not even be the THC or nicotine part. It may be additives or substances that may be common. It may be material that is not labeled appropriately. And so we really do think consumers need to be quite cautious right now.
Got it. And you can't rule out any brand of e-cigarettes at this point, right?
No single brand, product, substance, or additive has been ruled out as of today.
I'd also like to better understand some of the possible contributing factors to the outbreak that you're considering. First of all, on August 22nd, CDC said, quote, even though the cases seem similar, it is not clear if these cases have a common cause or if they are different diseases with similar presentations. Does that mean that it could be multiple separate problems with e-cigarettes that are causing similar results?
Yes, that's right. The respiratory symptoms are very nonspecific and the X-ray findings are diverse. And so we also have cases in nearly all states at this point. Whether the products in one state are the same as the problematic products in another, or whether manipulation of the products is what's going on, we don't know. So I think we have to have a very open mind.
We don't know the full impacts of vaping. If so many different vaping products are causing the same result, could the common link possibly be the process of vaping itself, inhaling aerosolized liquid particles into our lungs?
We don't know enough about the aerosol that vaping produces or that e-cigarette produces in terms of the short and longer term health impacts, and products may, it may be that the process itself is risky.
All e-cigarettes include solvents like propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. While they are considered safe in food, a recent Baylor study found those solvents, when inhaled, reduce the lungs' ability to fight infection, increase the chances of getting the flu, and of dying from it. Dr. Schuchat, these solvents are in all e-cigarettes. Can the CDC rule them out as a factor in the current outbreak?
We have not ruled out any substance within the e-cigarettes or vaping products yet.
Many of the victims were using flavored products. To add flavor to an e-cigarette requires additional chemicals on top of the various solvents that we just talked about. Can CDC rule out the chemicals and flavors as a factor in the current outbreak?
No, we can't.
Dr. Schuchat, I just want to remind everybody that you took a far-reaching warning or admonition to the public. That is, the CDC advises the public to consider not using any e-cigarettes at this point. The CDC also advises that those who do not vape not to start, that children and pregnant women never use e-cigarettes, and for those trying to quit smoking, to use an FDA-approved cessation device. E-cigarettes are not approved by FDA for smoking cessation. With that, thank you. And now I recognize Mr. Cloud for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you. Dr. Schuchat, previously the CDC has said that the illnesses that we're seeing aren't necessarily a result of infections, but rather chemical exposure. Do you maintain that distinction, or is it possible that the chemical exposure is leading to reduced immune system, therefore leading to infection?
Part of the case definition is to rule out infections as a cause. Certainly, people presenting with cough, shortness of breath, and abnormal x-rays often have an infection, but in these episodes, we don't believe infection is what's causing the problem, and we do think it's one or more chemical exposure.
Okay. Do the patients generally have symptoms immediately after vaping, or is it do they appear later?
We understand from the early reports that there's a progression of between days and weeks of worsening symptoms until the difficulties are severe enough to present for hospitalization. Nearly all of the cases have required hospitalizations. Many of them have required intensive care unit and mechanical ventilation. And as you know, sadly, several cases have passed away.
Have you been able to investigate supply lines? What I've read, it seems like it's been very difficult to backtrack where a number of these products are coming from.
This is a very active investigation. The FDA is leading the product tracebacks, and they are also working with the DEA in that effort. We're certainly trying to gather information on the products that individuals have used. Many people have used more than one product and may have acquired them from a variety of retail, online, social sources, or sort of on the street.
All right. When it comes to teen vaping, do you have a sense of where teens are acquiring products?
I don't have that data right now, but we do see a significant rise in the use of e-cigarettes among teenagers, both middle school and high school students. And one of the things that we see in common there is the role of flavors, that flavors are a big attractor for teenagers. And usually the first product people are using is flavored. But in terms of where they're getting them, I don't have the data. Sometimes it's really just a friend or a peer who's providing something to them.
And to follow up on that, I guess my question is, in most states, it's already illegal for teens to acquire the vaping products, right? Is it?
That's right. In terms of e-cigarette use is not supposed to be for anyone under 18, and that is since the 2016 legislation.
Is there any effort underway really in the realm of enforcement and prosecution for those who are getting products to teens?
That would be the realm of the FDA in terms of the federal legislation for the e-cigarettes. And so there certainly, the issue of access to products is a key barrier to use of e-cigarettes among youth. And the stricter it is, the better. So we're very much in support of making it extremely difficult for young people to get products that they're not supposed to have.
What are some of the recommendations would you have when it comes to that?
There are a variety of population-based strategies that are shown to be effective to limit access for youth to cigarettes or e-cigarettes at this point. One of the issues is the advertising that is particularly appealing to youth. That's a problem that we saw with cigarettes decades ago, and we have been seeing again with e-cigarettes more recently. Another is the retail sites requiring proof of age. There are a number of other efforts we're doing in terms of raising, that we don't do, but the states select strategies like raising the price, as well as using efforts to educate in the schools, toolkits for schools and so forth.
Right. Do you have I know we're talking about product lines and supply chain. Do you have any sense of how much is coming from counterfeiting places or China? Or, I mean, there's a lot of loopholes when it comes to freight and air freight, products that aren't checked coming in. Do we have any sense of where the illicit products coming from?
What I would say is that this is an extremely dynamic market. The legal market and perhaps the illicit market are both very dynamic. We've seen huge changes in market share for e-cigarettes in the past couple years, and I believe there's likely to be an illicit market that's mirroring the rise that we're seeing in the legal market.
Thank you, Mr. Cloud. I now recognize Congressman DeSaulnier for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and the ranking member for having this hearing. And Doctor, thank you for the work you do and being here. On September 6th, the CDC issued the following statement during a press conference announcing this investigation, and I quote, "While the investigation is ongoing, CDC advises that individuals consider not using e-cigarettes because as of now, this is the primary means of preventing this type of severe lung disease, and that e-cigarette use is never safe for youth, young adults, or pregnant women." During the same press conference, you announced that you were setting up your emergency operations center. Doctor, could you describe to the committee what factors led CDC to that decision and what kind of expertise will result from that? And given the life-threatening emergency that we're faced in, how do we make sure that we don't lose anyone else?
This is a fast-moving and very serious outbreak of a new condition in primarily young people. CDC established an incident management system to respond to the outbreak and then took the additional step of activating our emergency operations center. We have more than 100 people responding to the outbreak right now in Atlanta, as well as deployed to assist its states. And we took the step of activation to better support the state and local public health who are on the front line of this. We have hundreds of cases getting reported to us from all across the nation. In order to work efficiently and effectively with the states as well as the FDA and others, the EOC activation facilitates that.
Doctor, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. When I go home, Juul is now spending up to $40 million, probably more, in overturning a local ordinance by the San Francisco municipal government that merely says that e-cigarettes are banned until the FDA comes up with the end of their investigation of whether they're safe or not. Recently, we had an executive and a founder of Juul sit here and, from my perspective, try to say that e-cigarettes, their product, actually is helpful to keeping people away from tobacco, particularly young people. In Richmond, California, in my district, they just passed a similar ordinance. So those ordinances, and we'll talk about this more in the second panel, seems to me to be a preventative, cautious approach to this. You've got a product out there that is leading to deaths. What could we do further as a Congress to make sure this doesn't happen? We have a company, in my view, that has no ethical boundaries, is in the business of addicting people, particularly young people, and then is willing to spend $40 million. And the FDA has announced that their criminal division is investigating them, and I hope they investigate their political consultants as well. They're not they're shameless when it comes to the information they give. So given you're getting the public health officials involved, given that this committee is actively involved, this is a daunting task to try to make sure that the public actually understands, particularly young people who are vulnerable, as you alluded to in your opening statements, to advertising like this.
You know, I appreciate the committee's interest in the topic and the attention that you have given to this. We know that youth should not use e-cigarettes, that nicotine is one of the most addictive substances that there is, and that nicotine is dangerous for the developing brain that adolescents and young adults have. We also know that flavors are a major attractant for young people, and that they often are the first e-cigarette type that children use, and that the latest generation of e-cigarettes has a higher available nicotine level that is particularly addictive. And so the last few years of data raise our concerns substantially in terms of the epidemic of youth e-cigarette use, and I appreciate all that the committee's doing to address that.
Do you need more statutory authority? In this instance, when young people in particular and life and death are on the line, would it be helpful for the CDC to have the statutory authority to not just encourage people not to use it, but prohibit people from using this until your investigation's done?
Well, the CDC doesn't typically have regulatory authority over this type of matter. The FDA does. And as you know, the FDA is taking many measures now to intensify their work in light of this epidemic, both the epidemic of youth vaping and the outbreak of lung injury. I think one of the key things that could help in this investigation, though, in terms of the outbreak, is modernization of our data systems that are really outdated, slow. The epidemic is moving faster than our data gathering, and we're really losing people in the meantime.
And I appreciate that. The reason I asked the question is to suggest that the FDA is moving too slowly, and it might be, in my perspective, more efficient if the CDC actually had the authority to say that these products should be removed from being legally sold. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeSaulnier. I now recognize Congressman Grothman for 5 minutes of questioning.
Okay, how long have these e-cigarettes been on the market?
There are a number of different products, and we're really on the 4th generation now. So I would say,
how many years?
Well, in 2011, we were seeing the first of the products, and by 2012, there was a doubling in their use.
The first e-cigarettes were on the market in just 2011?
We started measuring.
When were they?
Oh, excuse me. This just in 2007.
Yeah, I thought it was before that. Okay. You said maybe 80% of the people who got sick, they admitted putting THC in their e-cigarettes. How do you determine whether or not they had any illegal substance in their e-cigarettes or not?
The information that you're citing is based on history. Individuals said what they thought they were using. There has been some testing of products that are still available.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm trying to get at here. You're the one who testified that 80% of the people who got sick may have had THC in the product. Because THC is, I believe, illegal in most states in the country, and I assume that some people don't like to volunteer that they've been doing something illegally. I wondered whether that is a hard number or maybe it's closer to 100% because some people, when asked, don't admit that they are breaking the law.
The number that you're citing comes from an Illinois-Wisconsin report in the New England Journal of Medicine about what a small number of patients described using. We acknowledge that individuals may be reluctant to describe use.
Yeah, self-reporting. Okay, next question. You guys report that about 72% of the people who got sick were male. Could you tell me, e-cigarettes overall, what percentage of people who buy legal e-cigarettes are female and what percent are male?
More males buy e-cigarettes than females.
Okay. 72% though hits me as a high number.
The statistics on the proportion of these lung injury cases that are male has been decreasing as we get more cases reported to us. So we'll be updating those numbers. But you're right that so far, nearly 3 in 4 of the reported cases are in boys or men.
How about people, well, how about people who buy e-cigarettes to prevent smoking, which is what, 10 years ago, I thought that was the whole deal. We had this new way to prevent people from smoking. We have over 400,000 people a year dying of smoking-related illnesses. 10 years ago, this was perceived to be a good thing. Of people who buy e-cigarettes to stop smoking, do you have a breakdown male by female, male versus female?
We know that e-cigarette use is much more frequent in young people than adults.
Yeah, I know, but you're not answering my question.
I don't have the breakdown of those who are using e-cigarettes for cessation.
Okay. I think in most states, THC is illegal. But over time, more and more states are legalizing marijuana. I don't know who to blame for that. But including my neighbor to the south in Illinois, are these cartridges or these new things legal in states which legalize marijuana or not?
The legal provinces in states are quite different right now. It's a very diverse landscape, and I don't have the specifics on individual states.
You got to get up to. I wish you'd look into that. I'm concerned because right now, right to the south of Wisconsin, Illinois has decided to go all in on making marijuana legal. You do not know, though, whether the Illinois statute will make these things legal or not?
The key thing about the
But just say
investigation
yes or
is
no.
that there's no single
Just if you don't
product,
know, just say, "I
cartridge,
don't know."
substance, or additive that's been linked to the cases in this outbreak.
Okay, but you don't know it's possible that Illinois just made this stuff legal?
Which stuff?
THC in cartridges?
I don't know.
Okay. I'd like you to look into it because it's something we should know. It was a disaster. It sounds like it's big trouble if Illinois just made these things legal. Could you explain why we dealt with these a little bit when I was in the state legislature maybe 8 years ago, and at the time you never heard about this. Why is this a new thing happening now and you never heard about it 8 years ago?
Do you mean the youth vaping, or you mean the outbreak of lung injury?
People dying.
Thank you. We don't know, but we know that the products out there have changed a lot, and the use has probably increased, but we don't yet know if there's a new particularly risky product out there, or a substance that's in the products, or manipulation that's dangerous. There's a fourth generation of e-cigarette products that are out there that may perhaps be related in some way to this, but we don't know yet why this condition is occurring in this particular epidemic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grothman. I now recognize Congresswoman Hill for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Schuchat, on September 6th, LA County had its first reported vaping death. The week before, an LA County teenager began an anti-vaping campaign from her hospital bed, where her lungs had failed from using e-cigarettes and where had to be put on a ventilator. LA County Public Health Officer Dr. Munto Davis has compared the revelations about e-cigarettes to the slow discovery of the danger of cigarettes several decades ago. Across California, there have been 57 cases of acute lung disease among people with a recent history of vaping since late June, according to state health officials. Parents, kids, and adult vapers are understandably scared by the outbreak of lung disease sweeping the country and claiming lives. The CDC and state health departments, with Illinois at the forefront, have been working together to investigate the outbreak. Dr. Schuchat, as of a couple days ago, CDC has reported 530 confirmed and probable cases of lung disease in 38 states. Are those numbers expected to grow as states examine older cases against the current case definition?
We are seeing more and more cases each day, and I expect the next weekly numbers will be much higher.
Thank you. How does the disease typically present itself in patients' symptoms?
People have days or even weeks of worsening breathing problems, cough, shortness of breath, sometimes with fever or nausea and vomiting.
And what do we know about the time range for symptoms to set in after the last use of e-cigarettes?
We don't have lots of details. It may be days or weeks.
And for those affected by the lung disease, how long are they being hospitalized, and are they typically in intensive care?
The average hospitalization length so far is about 6 days. Many are in intensive care. Many require mechanical ventilation.
That's what I was going to say. How many of the patients require medical intervention to breathe?
A large proportion.
And what has been successful in treating them?
As of now, we know that antibiotics don't have an effect, and that's consistent with the idea it's not an infection, but some are seeing improvement after use of corticosteroids or steroids. We don't have evidence yet about the benefits and risks, but we do think that clinicians should consider use of corticosteroids in treating patients on an individual basis.
So it's potentially some kind of inflammation that is like an acute inflammation.
That's right.
So the joint study by Illinois and Wisconsin found a median age of 19 years old in those two states, and that 32% of those affected are under 18. Why is this affecting young, otherwise healthy kids?
We don't have all the answers, and as we gather more data, we're finding more individuals who are older also at risk. But we do see in our national data, half of the cases are under 25.
And we're deeply alarmed by the 9 deaths, including one reported last night, that are linked to this disease in the short span of its outbreak. Is there anything we've learned about how this lung disease results in death and what we can do to avoid it?
We're really looking into that closely right now. Sadly, we are hearing about more deaths, as you just mentioned, and we do expect more. That's one of the reasons we've been trying to get our health recommendations out there, so that until we know more, people who are concerned about their health risks refrain from using e-cigarettes or vaping products, or at least consider that.
Is it possible that this disease has been going on longer than we thought, and it's just now being linked to e-cigarette use?
I think it's less likely that large scale we've been seeing this and missed it. We're using something called syndromic surveillance now to look back in time at emergency department visits, and we have evidence that things really started to pick up in the spring or summer for this condition. Of course, there probably have been individual instances that we missed.
So when I think about families in my district whose kids are vaping and who are deeply concerned, to me, this is one of the most important questions. When specifically should someone go to the doctor, and what information should they convey?
You know, if you've been using e-cigarettes or vaping and you're having difficulty breathing or cough and the kinds of symptoms that we've described, you should talk to your doctor about that. We don't know exactly how rapidly people progress, but we are concerned about the very severe cases we've been seeing in young people.
We've heard from some patients that doctors have not uniformly asked about vaping or juuling. Vapers say no if doctors ask if they smoke. Do you think doctors need to change the questions they ask their patients, and how can we make that happen?
Yes, we recommend that doctors not only ask, do you smoke cigarettes, but ask if you smoke, if you use e-cigarettes or vaping products. We think it's really important at this time for clinicians and parents to educate themselves about the types of products that are out there and to ask the right questions.
Patients who have recovered and released are being told they'll need periodic lung scans. Do we know whether this outbreak will result in long-term or permanent lung damage?
I fear that it may, but we do not know that yet, and we do recommend clinicians do regular follow-up of individuals. The clinical community, the pulmonologists and so forth, are studying patients, and of course it's so new that we don't have long-term follow-up yet.
Thank you so much. I'm out of time and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Hill. I now recognize Congressman Comer for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I want to spend my 5 minutes talking about CBD, because I believe there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about exactly what CBD is and what THC is. So CBD is cannabidiol oil, and it is something that a lot of people take. A lot of people in Congress take CBD. Millions of Americans take CBD. I take CBD. These are two of the CBD products that I take, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. There are two sources of CBD. There's hemp and marijuana. And hemp and marijuana are two different plants in the same plant family, kind of like broccoli and cauliflower. If you can imagine what broccoli and cauliflower look like, they have some similarities, but they're also very different. That's the way it is with hemp and marijuana. And then there's THC. And THC is an acronym that measures the level of psychoactive material in CBD. So if you look at CBD, the majority of CBD that most Americans are taking and they're having really positive effects from CBD is coming from hemp, not marijuana. And the hemp CBD has little to no THC. And that's something that there's a lot of confusion when I hear people talk about CBD and THC. Prior to coming to Congress, I was Commissioner of Agriculture in Kentucky. And we were the first state. This was something that was a platform for mine when I was elected Commissioner of Agriculture to make industrial hemp a reality in America. We weren't growing hemp in America. America was the only industrialized nation that didn't grow industrial hemp. So in Kentucky, we became the first state to grow hemp. Today, Kentucky's the leading hemp producing state in the nation. There are at least 15 hemp processors in Kentucky that are making CBD oil. I have been in these two products here that I take. I've been in those companies. I've seen their labs, and those companies are, in my opinion, producing a good, legitimate product. But those companies want the industry to be regulated. Currently, there are no FDA regulations on CBD oil, and the legitimate, credible companies want regulation. I have worked with Congresswoman Pingree in Maine. We have submitted a bipartisan letter with 24 other members of Congress in both parties asking the FDA to hurry up and issue FDA regulations with respect to CBD. Let me note, Juul does not sell any CBD pods. All their pods are nicotine pods. So the sickness that happened and the deaths that came from CBD, from people juuling or using e-cigarettes with CBD, these were counterfeit pods. And the people that were producing these pods, not only were they counterfeit, they don't know what levels of THC they were putting in the pods because there's really no regulations on it. This CBD industry is like the Wild West. It's a good industry, it's a good product, but there needs to be regulations. I'm very conservative, very pro-business. Normally I'm against regulations, but sometimes we need regulations. A young man in my district was recently hospitalized from vaping CBD with excessive amounts of THC. He bought the pods from a friend. They released him from the hospital and he got sick again, was hospitalized again with a collapsed lung, and he had to be put on life support in my district. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that this article detailing my constituent's story be inserted into the record.
Without objection, so
I also
ordered.
want to note the Associated Press has tested 30 vapor products that were marketed containing CBD and found that 10 of the 30 contained synthetic marijuana, 22 of the 30 contained very little or no CBD. This CBD produced in my congressional district, processed in my congressional district, has no THC, zero THC. So there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about CBD that I wanted to make sure that everyone understood. The Associated Press also reported on testing that the DEA had done and found that 128 of the 350 CBD products they had tested contained synthetic marijuana. 3 of these tested products contain fentanyl. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the 2 articles from the Associated Press be inserted into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll conclude by saying that I think that there are a lot of positive benefits from cannabidiol oil, but this industry needs to be regulated. This industry is very prevalent in my congressional district, and they want regulation to make sure there are no bad actors, to make sure there are no fly-by-night companies that are coming in producing cannabidiol oil with excessive amounts of THC. So that's something that I'm working on. I had Chairman Colin Peterson in my congressional district Sunday visiting with some of these hemp processors. Our office is working with USDA and FDA to try to see that we have good regulations that protect the consumers while helping the industry grow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. I now recognize Congressman Khanna for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. Dr. Schuckett, is it true that 28% of the nation's 12th graders reported vaping nicotine at least once in the past 30 days?
Those data are from the preliminary results of the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey. The final results aren't quite available, but that's right.
And is there a statistical analysis that found that for one smoker that successfully quits thanks to e-cigarettes, 81 young e-cigarette users will become traditional cigarette smokers? Are you familiar with that?
I don't have that statistic, but what I can say is that e-cigarette use is much more frequent among young people, youth, than it is among adults.
And are you familiar that people who use e-cigarettes then end up going and using regular cigarettes?
That's right. The National Academy of Medicine looked at that in terms of whether e-cigarette use may lead to lead to smoking cigarettes, and there's moderate evidence about that. The newest generation of e-cigarettes isn't really covered under that study, and the newest generation seems to have a number of factors that make it even more addictive or even more popular among youth. So we don't really have the long-term follow-up on them.
Now, on September 11, 2019, President Trump announced a ban on flavored e-cigarettes. He finally did something I agree with. And it hasn't been implemented yet at the FDA. My understanding is the CDC came out in strong support of the flavor ban, with the director stating that it's needed to reduce the epidemic. But Washington is a very political place. And so now you have the president's advisors telling him that this is going to hurt his reelection in battleground states because there are hundreds of thousands of people in battleground states who vape. What would you tell the president about that argument that his advisors are making and whether he should stick to his original ban?
Let me just say that the regulation of tobacco products is under the FDA, not the CDC. As a public health expert and as a leader at the CDC, I can say that we're extremely concerned about flavors and the role that they play in hooking young people to a life of nicotine, and that we really want to avoid another generation being addicted to nicotine. So addressing flavors directly is a good idea in terms of the role that they play in young people, particularly middle school and high school students beginning to use e-cigarettes.
And on a substantive level, how would you answer the trade-off where people say, we agree with you on children not having these flavors, and that's why I support a ban, that's why people support a ban. But what do you say adults should do who want to transition off cigarettes? Are there ways that they can still use e-cigarettes without the flavor, with only the tobacco flavor? Is there any evidence to suggest that it would diminish their ability to reduce their addiction to cigarettes?
We don't think that flavors are the critical factor in e-cigarettes for adults who are trying to get off of smoking cigarettes. We think the nicotine level is the principal issue there. And we certainly encourage adults to quit smoking and use FDA-approved devices or approaches to do that. Behavioral counseling is also recommended, and there's emerging data that's being looked at about the role of e-cigarettes. None of the e-cigarette companies have applied to FDA to be approved as a cessation device as of yet.
So would it be fair to say then that you do not think banning flavors in e-cigarettes would in any way harm adults who seek to quit regular cigarettes by using e-cigarette products?
I think the way you've characterized that, I would agree with.
All right. I have no further questions.
Would the gentleman yield
I yield.
your 30 seconds? Dr. Schuckett, fourth generation devices, you keep referring to this. What are those?
Well, what I'm trying to imply is that that Juul and related products use nicotine salts, which can lead to much more available nicotine. We believe they can the product can cross the blood-brain barrier and lead to potentially more effect on the developing brain in adolescence.
And when was this fourth generation introduced to the market?
Well, the Juul itself was 2015, but the market share really ratcheted up in more recently. So the 2018 data was 78% higher than 2017 for high school students, and the preliminary data is even higher for 2019.
And that's based on the fourth generation device really taking off.
Right, and we know that Juul went up to like over 70% market share more recently than 2015. 2015, it had a tiny market share.
Okay, thank you so much. I now recognize Congresswoman Miller for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Krishnamurthy and Ranking Member Cloud, and thank you for being here today. There are two key issues that we must keep in mind surrounding e-cigarette usage. First, we must do everything we can to keep e-cigarettes out of the hands of those who are underaged. Secondly, we must also recognize e-cigarettes' critical role in harm reduction. For that reason, we must not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can both prevent children from using e-cigarettes while also ensuring that they remain available for those adults who are choosing to quit smoking and trying to do it through such a mechanism. We have to work together with our federal agencies to curb the online procurement of e-cigarettes, pods, and vape fluid by underaged individuals. This unregulated black market does not have any of the protections for those to use their products and to pose a safety risk for the public. I understand that there are companies who sell in the United States that have taken a proactive and positive steps to prevent underaged individuals from procuring their products both online and in stores. Dr. Shukat, can you first discuss the dangers of buying illegal or counterfeit vape products online?
We think it's really critical to know what you are using, and it's very difficult right now in terms of online purchases or off the street purchases or getting products from a friend to know what you have. We also know that labels may be misleading and counterfeited. So right now, the products are very diverse and fastly changing, and it's really one of those eras where consumers have to beware. We do think that retail stores really need to be enforcing the rules about not selling to underage individuals, and that we need to ensure that companies are not marketing to youth directly or indirectly through influencers or social media. There's just a lot of evidence that ads that are attractive to youth help them begin, and that the type of products we have on the market right now are extremely addictive.
Testing performed by a lab in California found that some black marketed THC cartridges contained more than 35% vitamin E acetate, and some tested positive for pesticides. What would substances like this do to the lungs of an unsuspecting user?
You point out a couple different substances that no one would really want to have in the middle of their lungs, and I think right now what we're working very vigorously on is trying to understand what are the products that individuals who've come down with this lung injury use, and what was in them, and what was in them in a lot of other products. So FDA laboratories are working very hard on that issue right now.
So is that present in the cases that the CDC is monitoring right now?
There's a variety of different substances that we're hearing about. We don't have full data yet. It's important to know that there may not be much remaining product from an individual. They might have used up the pod, for instance, and there may be differences in what you measure in a pod than what the lungs are exposed to when that substance is heated to a very high temperature. So there are kind of sophisticated studies going on to try to analyze both the product and then potentially the vapor or the aerosol as well. So we can't say any particular substance has been linked to all cases or the majority of cases as of yet.
Is there a name of this disease that people are getting?
Well, we're calling it lung injury associated with e-cigarettes or vaping. It's not particularly catchy, and so we don't have a name that's shorter yet.
Just lung disease.
Or we're saying lung injury because it really looks like an injury, not like a long-term disease like emphysema. Of course, long-term, there may be consequences of the injury that we're seeing.
Isn't it true that counterfeit products sometimes design their packaging to look like legitimate manufacturers? And is the CDC seeing cases of pulmonary illness coming from these counterfeit products?
I don't have information about counterfeit products, but that's exactly why counterfeit products make labels to deceive the consumer.
Okay, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Congresswoman Presley for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on this committee to hold Juul and other e-cigarette manufacturers accountable for what is an urgent public health crisis. I am heartened to see the bipartisan interest and commitment to address what is a fast-moving outbreak, and I'm hopeful that we will show similar and equitable outrage when it comes to gun violence, which is also a public health crisis. Dr. Schuchat, thank you for being here and thank you for your efforts in addressing this outbreak. I wanted to just revisit the line of questioning from Representative Khanna in talking about the Trump administration's intent to ban all flavored e-cigarettes from the market. The administration's ban clearly states that mint and menthol will be included. And I just wanted to get this answer on the record. Mint and menthol are, of course, correct?
Correct.
Yes or no? To be effective, do you agree that the flavor ban needs to include mint and menthol?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm encouraged by federal and state efforts to ban flavors and e-cigarettes, especially as flavors continue to be a main driver of why youth are using these products. I want to do a special bit of acknowledgement in my home state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, our Attorney General, Maura Healey, and leadership of cities like Somerville and Cambridge. Even worse, 63% of Juul users ages 15 to 25 have no idea that the product contains nicotine. They think it just has flavors. A dangerous misconception considering that all Juul products deliver nicotine. And according to the company's website, a single Juul pod is equivalent to smoking 1 pack of cigarettes. Dr. Schuchat, are you familiar with the term nic sick?
No, actually.
What about nicotine poisoning?
Yes, yeah.
Can you describe how these symptoms might present themselves in children with high intake of nicotine?
You know, the variety of symptoms that can occur from extremely high levels of nicotine is scary. The specifics I'll probably need to get to you, but I think that we are aware of a number of poison control calls related to e-cigarette use in sort of overdosing, if you will. And then in terms of seizures haven't been reported as adverse events, but the specifics of that, I'd have to get back to you.
And do you know what impact are the harms of high-dose nicotine when it comes to adolescent development? We've talked about how it might more acutely present, but what's the impact on adolescent development?
Yeah, the concerns about the developing brain in adolescence are that nicotine can lead to difficulty with memory, learning, and attention. It can also prime the brain and prime the body for addiction to other substances, and that's of particular concern.
All right. And then I'm just curious, have any states that the CDC coordinates with observed improvements in any of the 530 confirmed cases since they fell ill? In other words, are you noting any improvements for those that have been diagnosed with a lung injury? And what best practices would you recommend to states and hospitals as they begin to track long-term impacts?
Yeah, we know that in small numbers, the use of steroids during treatment may improve outcome, but we don't have scientific data or large-scale numbers yet on that. We're recommending right now that clinicians individualize care, but they consider the use of steroids in terms of its benefit and its potential harms. And sometimes steroids can be risky if you do think there's infection going on. We also recommend that clinicians follow patients after discharge, including with pulmonary function tests, to see whether the lungs really come back fully to what you'd expect in an otherwise healthy young person. And then clinical communities are gathering the data to come out with more official recommendations.
Thank you. You know, no matter what you call it, juuling, vaping, smoking, it's all the same. And a new generation of young people are becoming addicted to nicotine through these kid-friendly flavors. And we have no idea truly the long-term impacts this will have. As a mother and a lawmaker, I find this frightening. I yield back.
Thank you. Will the gentlewoman yield her time for questioning? Fourth generation e-cigarettes and the nicotine salts. What is the importance of that? You said it penetrates the blood-brain barrier. What's the import of that?
You know, the issue is easier access of nicotine to the brain may have a higher risk of leading to those issues that I mentioned, the learning difficulty, the attention problems, memory issues, and so as well as priming for addiction. So I think that the brain is pretty central in the issue of addiction as well as in cognitive functioning, and we're concerned that higher doses of nicotine getting into the brain may lead to larger problems. That fourth generation is not just Juul, but it's the other pod mod combos. And the other factor I hadn't mentioned yet is just the devices are ones that are very easy to conceal. You can have them in the classroom. The teacher doesn't even know that you're using the e-cigarette. And so between the very high levels of accessible nicotine and the discrete use of the products, we think that the rise in teen youth is particularly dangerous.
Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Jordan for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, 530 cases, and then is it accurate 8 deaths as well that have been, 8 deaths associated with the lung illness and vaping?
Yes, it's even more than that now, but we'll be updating the official numbers on Thursday. So we believe that probably hundreds more have come in since the numbers we released last week.
What about, but no additional people have passed away, right?
There may, when a death occurs, the state investigates to identify whether they do believe it's related to this condition, and then they report to us. And so we let the states report publicly before we report on the amassed number. I think we're above 8 at this point.
Okay. Let's stick with the numbers 530 and 8. You said this about the 530 cases. Most patients have reported a history of using e-cigarettes products containing THC. Many patients have reported using THC and nicotine. Some have reported the use of e-cigarette products containing only nicotine. So most, many, and some, if I get the distinctions right. Can you give me percentages on each of those? So most of the 530 have used e-cigarette products with THC. What percentage is that?
Actually, those terms are related to the very small number that had been described in the Illinois-Wisconsin series, and the most was, this is really about less than 50 cases, and most was about 80%, many was about 60%, and some was less than 20%. But we'll be updating the numbers.
You don't have the percentages on the 530
No,
number, just on the smaller population sample of Illinois, Wisconsin.
That's right.
Okay. Any guess at the 530? Would it be would you think it'd be similar? 80% have used. Do you think it would be similar? And it'd be 80% of the 530 cases were using the THC.
The trend continues in the preliminary look at larger numbers, but I don't have the precise final numbers yet. So I do believe that the majority report use of THC or THC and nicotine products.
And then, of course, there is the issue that the gentleman from Wisconsin raised, that the people who say they only used e-cigarette products containing only nicotine may not be totally forthcoming. They may be fudging a little bit on that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it could be potentially that this THC is linked to all the cases of a health concern. Now, do you have the data on the 8 people who have passed away? Do you know if it was, do you have any data on those? Were they using THC or not?
I don't have that data, but a really important point is it may not be the THC or the nicotine, but it may be something associated with those products that people are using.
You just don't know yet.
Right.
Okay. Now, you also said you talked about the epidemic at the youth level, particularly high school level. What was the numbers? And I agree. This is I don't want any kids using this product. bunch of other things either, but what was the number for high schools students who are using the product?
Yeah, the preliminary data that was reported from the FDA, preliminary look at 2019 data was about 28% of high school students reported using e-cigarettes, which was a big jump from about 20% the year before.
Yeah, that is. What is do you know the numbers for high school students who've used marijuana?
It's less common, but I don't have the numbers right in front of me.
My understanding is it's over 20% as well. Is that right?
I think you need to differentiate numbers that are used in the past year versus used in the past month. And the numbers I was giving you for e-cigarettes was used in the past month. So
Okay.
I don't have those numbers for marijuana.
Is it over 20% as well?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay. I mean, I figured it was. Okay, I just was curious on some of these numbers. It seems to me we got an epidemic with marijuana use, with vaping, with all kinds of things that, and we should be talking about all of those issues that are a concern to for young people. That I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, G.
Yeah, actually, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I did
Dr.
find the number for you. Sorry, I knew I had seen it, but the number that I have for adolescents' use of marijuana is 12.5% in the past year.
Okay.
So not the past month, but the past year. So a bit less than the 28% in the past month for e-cigarettes.
Mr. Jordan, would you yield your remaining 14 seconds for a question? Okay. Dr. Schuchat, of the 530 cases, how many of them were related to fourth generation devices?
I don't have that data yet.
Okay, thank you. I now recognize Congresswoman Tlaib for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier this month, my home state of Michigan became the first to ban flavored e-cigarettes. This came after news of e-cigarette smokers showing up in emergency rooms with shortness of breath, chest pain, coughing, vomiting. Nationally, we have seen, we've repeated in this committee, over 700, at least 530 cases of lung disease in e-cigarette users in 38 states. And it exposes just how little we know about these products. Nicotine e-cigarettes were allowed onto the market with little regulation and advertised as safer alternatives to cigarettes. In practice, I truly believe that we've become testing ground, the American public, most disturbingly our American youth. And right now there is so much that we do not know about the long-term impact of e-cigarettes. But what we do know now currently is pretty alarming. And so, Dr. Schuchat, why do you believe e-cigarettes have not been approved as succession methods? Because they're advertised that way.
Right. To my knowledge, the companies haven't submitted the data in support of getting them approved as cessation methods. That companies would need to answer that, but it can be a costly process, and it may be that they would also need to describe the public health standard being met, and that may be difficult at this time.
That's right. And Ms. Schuchat, yes or no, is it ever safe for kids or young adults to use e-cigarettes?
No.
What about traditional cigarettes?
No.
CDC has stated that e-cigarettes harm the parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, impulses. Could that account for why we've heard so many teen jewelers complain about mood swings, spouts like anger, depression, and trouble concentrating?
Well, there's a lot going on in adolescence, but it may be part of that.
We have also heard from many people who believed e-cigarettes were safe, and it's easy to see why, as we've continually see the misleading and the lies to the American public. But earlier this month, we wrote a letter to the FDA outlining our findings of instances of Juul telling the public that its products were safe. Those included testimony at our July hearing that Juul went into schools and told ninth graders that its products were, quote, totally safe. They used the word totally safe. We were pleased to see that FDA answered our call by declaring that Juul broke the law and issuing a warning letter. FDA gave Juul until September 30th to respond. To those listening, please pay attention to that response and what we hope will be prompt action by FDA to hold Juul accountable. So Dr. Schuchat, the CDC has asked the public to consider not using any e-cigarettes. Has the industry's false safety narrative made it more difficult to get your message out?
We know that there's a lot of noise out there, and we've been repeating our messages. We do hope that the seriousness of disease and including death is getting attention, but there's a lot of competing messages.
As much as e-cigarette companies imply that they are smoking cessation products, none are approved by the FDA for that purpose, as we talked about. CDC has recommended that adult smokers who are using e-cigarettes to quit smoking traditional cigarettes should instead use, quote, evidence-based treatments, including counseling and FDA-approved medications. So Dr. Schuchat, to your knowledge, has there ever been any outbreak of lung disease associated with FDA-approved cigarette smoking cessation devices like patches and gum?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you so much, and I yield the rest of my time, Chairman.
Thank you, Congresswoman Tlaib. Without objection, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, the gentlewoman from Florida, shall be permitted to join the subcommittee on the dais and be recognized for questioning the witness. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the committee's indulgence and for including me. Dr. Schuchat, welcome, and thank you so much. I've had the honor of working with CDC on a number of different important initiatives, and the work of you and your colleagues is really remarkable. I want to ask you a couple of basic questions and then a few illustrative ones. Is there any evidence at all that nicotine addiction is harmful to an individual's health?
Yes.
Could you elaborate?
You know, we're particularly concerned about nicotine use in youth, in pregnant women or women who are pregnant, and in adults who are not using, already using cigarettes. The issue is the developing brain, the developing fetus, and the risk of going on to cigarette smoking. In the developing brain, I think it's key. Most people don't realize the brain continues to develop until age 25 in most people. And nicotine can cause many problems, including difficulties with attention, memory, learning problems. It can also prime the individual for addiction to other substances.
I asked you that because sometimes you ask a question that you already basically know the answer to, but as a parent of twin 20-year-olds and a 16-year-old, having children and young adults in the target in the target audience for these vaping products, that's important information to note, particularly in light of the fact that we had Juul executives testify here in what I found to be a very deceptive way, including a direct answer to a question of mine, in which the Juul executive that sat where you are sitting actually had the audacity to say that they didn't market their product as a smoking cessation product, splitting hairs between the idea that they are an alternative, a safer alternative to smoking, versus marketing it specifically as a smoking cessation product. Not that to me is a distinction without a difference. And so having an expert, a public health expert, actually say no health benefits to nicotine. In fact, nicotine addiction is harmful, particularly to the developing brain, is critical. Particularly because we do have a very real human impact of this outbreak, and I think it's important that it not be lost. There is a story that I want to share of a mother of 3 in Abilene, Texas, Cherie, who nearly died from vaping. She had never smoked cigarettes before. She tried e-cigarettes because she liked the taste of the flavors, and she became addicted. Cherie initially thought she had the flu, but within days she had to be rushed to the emergency room and put in a medical-induced coma. And there are now countless people who have had to be put into medically induced comas due to vaping, the impacts of vaping, and she spent nearly a month in the hospital. Dr. Schuchat, Cherie was a non-smoker drawn to e-cigarettes by their flavors. Is there evidence that you found that other non-smokers are being drawn in by the attraction to flavors?
Yes, that's right. Among youth right now, we're seeing that e-cigarettes are more common than cigarettes, and that flavors are pretty much always what brings the youth into starting use of e-cigarettes.
And do you think a ban on flavors of any type would bring a dramatic reduction to people who either might be attracted to begin to the flavors to begin vaping, or if they were no longer available, have people cease to vape?
We know that flavors are a big attractant, and so I hope that if flavors were not there, fewer people would take take the product up in their teen years.
Okay, and e-cigarette use is still relatively new. I support harm reduction public health activities. Advocates often describe e-cigarettes as a harm reduction for smokers, but I'm concerned that we don't actually know enough to say with confidence that e-cigarettes reduce harm. And in fact, Juul is actually being federally prosecuted in a criminal proceeding because of their deceptive practices. Much less that these e-cigarettes don't produce harm. Can you talk to us about the challenges of being able to accurately assess the safety of e-cigarettes?
The products have been changing quite a bit over the past several years. So short-term effects might have been looked at, but the long-term effects we don't know yet. And the aerosol that e-cigarettes can produce has a lot of substances in it. Their long-term effect we just don't know. Ultrafine particles.
So it's not just the
heavy metals.
nicotine that
Exactly.
is the public health problem and the threat. So hyper focusing on nicotine or any other substance that is found to have been mixed in with all of the other chemicals that could be harmful and likely are harmful is misleading at best.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And now I recognize Congressman Cox for 5 minutes of questioning.
I want to thank you, Chairman Chris Murphy and Ranking Member Cloud, for allowing me to wave onto this very important hearing. As you've pointed out, the recent CDC outbreak figures show that at least 500 people have experienced e-cigarette vaping-related lung injuries, and at least 8 people have died. I represent the Central Valley of California, and one of those most recent deaths was from one of my communities. I'm troubled to hear that we have yet another major health crisis on our hands, and this one is a special threat to our children and certainly our families. We need to know why this has happened. We need to understand what your agency is doing to combat this epidemic. And certainly we need solutions to prevent this from happening again, so not one more American dies needlessly. I understand coordination efforts are underway, but last week we called over to the Public Health Department in Tulare County to find out more about what happened to this individual. Unfortunately, they didn't have much information to share with us, but they did say they sent the vaping device to the state's public health department for further analysis. Naturally, I'm concerned about the data collection processes, the coordination efforts that we're employing to stop this outbreak from worsening. Earlier, you pointed out one of the actions that your office or the CDC is doing is to consider refraining, quote, I think you said consider refraining from using the product. No disrespect, but to me that sounds like pretty weak tea. Would it be more accurate to state simply that use of the product could cause death?
We're trying to be careful when we don't know what the substance that's at risk is, and we're trying to sustain credibility against those who may think we're exaggerating. That we know that people are dying right now in this outbreak of lung injury, and we really want people to protect themselves and not take risks unnecessarily.
I'm sorry, Dr. Stuckett. I'm really looking for a yes or no answer. Would it be accurate to state that use of this product could cause death?
This product part is hard to say.
One of these vaping products.
Right. So our recommendations are very broad because something that is in either e-cigarettes or other vaping products is leading to death. And so use of whatever that substance or brand or product or additive is can cause death. So yes, I think your comment is right. It's just that when we don't have a specific product, consumers may not take action. So we're trying to make them take this seriously in a way that they'll believe us.
Yeah. I think the admonition that it could cause death would be a warning. They should be taken seriously. And really, more of the broader sense is that regulations, in my mind, are really protections. And so when this administration boasts of deregulating things, what's really happening is that protections are being eliminated. And these deaths could be prevented if we enforce preventive public health measures of evaluating new products before they hit the market, especially products with known harm like nicotine. And so the question is really, why is the default procedure for letting products onto the market first, and then evaluating whether or not they present a public safety or health risk?
I don't know.
That's true, right? I can tell you is that, do you think that any product delivered through inhalation should be rigorously evaluated before marketing?
Yes.
Thanks. I can tell you that the CDC, in this regard, in my opinion, needs to find its voice again, and we in Congress are committed to helping do just that. Further, some of the specifics about what the CDC is currently doing, I'd like to know a little bit more about the individuals that have got the confirmed lung illnesses from e-cigarettes. And although that very little is known about the long-term health consequences of using these products, what is the CDC going to do about tracking the consequences and so on?
Yeah, the individuals who have the condition right now, majority are male, half are under 25, many are previously healthy. We're just gathering data now in more detail, but we're working with clinical communities, including lung specialists, to try to understand what long-term follow-up should look like and how that information should be collected. We're also working with the NIH in terms of some of the research questions, but the pulmonary community may help us come up with guidance for systematic evaluation and follow-up.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sukkot. We really appreciate what you and the CDC are doing on our benefit.
Thank you, Dr. Shukat. I think that concludes panel 1, and we will now commence panel 2. Thank you again for your testimony. I'd also like to remind everybody, the witnesses reminded that there may be additional questions for the record, and the committee requests that you answer them properly. If the second panel could please come forward. We are pleased to have you here.
That's exactly what Carol just said. Thank you. First office told me I saw a second office. Today's the day we all learn. Right. Okay. We'll get this show on the road. What time is it? 11:50. Wow. And they're going to do 4 opening statements. So, we'll have time to get back, but it will take a little bit. Ruby Johnson, and then I'll yield to Mr. Grothman. Ms. Porter. Yeah, how about Ruby Johnson right there? Okay. Mr. Grothman. What? Did you constituent Ms. Porter? Okay. Do you know? Is that her? Is that her? That's her. Okay.
Thank you so much. We begin our second panel here. We have Dr. Ngozi Ezike, Director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. Thank you. Dr. Albert Rizzo, Chief Medical Officer of the American Lung Association. Ruby Johnson, the parent of a teenager affected by the e-cigarette-related lung disease outbreak. And I will yield to my colleague, Mr. Grothman, to introduce his constituent.
I'd like to thank the chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce a good friend from Wisconsin, a passionate advocate for tobacco harm reduction. She's helped countless people quit smoking by sharing her story. Vicki Porter.
Thank you so much. If you would all please rise and raise your right hands, I will begin by swearing you in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. The microphones are sensitive, so please speak directly into them. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. With that, Dr. Ezike, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Krishnamurthy, Ranking Member Cloud, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to discuss this very concerning situation where hundreds of people across the country, including 69 in Illinois, have experienced severe respiratory illness after vaping or using e-cigarettes. And tragically, there has been one death in Illinois. And additional suspected cases are being reported to the department every day. Our patients in Illinois have ranged in age from 15 to 42, with a median age of 22. The majority of the patients have been male, with representing many counties throughout the state, both rural and urban areas. Over 95% of our cases have required hospitalization, 3/4 have needed placement in the intensive care unit, and over a third have required mechanical ventilation. While we have yet to clearly define the causative agent, what is clear is that there is nothing healthy about vaping, and there are heightened consequences for youth. Dr. Schuchat has amply covered the details of the current outbreak, and it's imperative that the investigation continue so as to definitively identify the etiology of the acute illnesses. But there is another matter that needs to be addressed. We need to address that in parallel to the illness investigation, and that matter is the youth vaping epidemic. Perhaps public health should have rung the alarm even louder as the epidemiology showed the rising rates of vaping. Even so, the current investigation has highlighted the creation of the next generation of nicotine-addicted Americans. E-cigarette use increased 900% amongst middle and high school students from 2011 to 2015, according to Dr. Wang's June 2018 MMWR report. The 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey showed 68% of youth vapers used flavored e-cigarette products. In December 2018, the US Surgeon General did discuss these alarming trends, noting research that found that more than 3.6 million youth were using e-cigarettes. Action is required now to protect our youth. I have led youth focus groups in the state and have heard recurring reports of symptoms that depict nicotine withdrawal in middle and high school students, many that have been vaping for as little as 3 to 6 months. We must permanently change the narrative around vaping and e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes are harmful. They are highly addictive. They are highly addictive because they are so efficient at delivering nicotine directly to the brain. And nicotine has no redeeming qualities for youth and young developing brains. In 2018, traditional cigarette smoking among Illinois high school seniors was down to 5%. But also in 2018, e-cigarette use was already at 27% among high school students. Our top priority has to be keeping these harmful products out of the grasp of our nation's youth. Most youth that are currently vaping never smoked traditional cigarettes before they took their first hit on the e-cigarette. Contemporary product designs, attractive technology, these devices actually sync up with their iPhones. The vapeware merchandise, all of this is targeted to youth. There are ads on Snapchat. There are hoodies that allow the wearer to take a hit from their e-cigarette using the drawstring of the hood. Clearly a tool to conceal the vaping. We cannot stand idly by and watch the high-tech e-cigarette erase the progress against youth smoking with enticements to vape through the marketing of trendy devices, cool accessories, and e-juice flavors like strawberry, watermelon, and mango. In the state of Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker supports moving forward with strong and effective legislation to ban flavored vaping products, which are exceedingly popular amongst young people. We need revised health curriculums in elementary and middle school to discuss the dangers of vaping. I urge Congress to take up similar initiatives to protect our youth and to support our message urging all people not to vape, especially while this national investigation is ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ezike. Next is Dr. Rizzo. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cloud, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Dr. Albert Rizzo. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the American Lung Association, and I still see patients in my pulmonary practice in Delaware. I'm privileged to be here and to speak about the dangers of e-cigarette use. For more than a decade, the American Lung Association has been raising the alarm about e-cigarettes. We will continue to reiterate our recommendation that the public not use any tobacco product, including e-cigarettes. We believe that all tobacco products could harm health and believe that there's no proven public health benefit to e-cigarettes. Our nation is currently in the midst of two different e-cigarette crises. First, according to the 2019 National Tobacco Youth Survey, 27.5% of youth are now using e-cigarettes, which is a 135% increase from just 2 years ago. According to a CDC study, one of the primary reasons teenagers use these products are because the candy and fruit flavors are so appealing. This high use of flavored e-cigarettes among youth is alarming and requires urgent and immediate action. The American Lung Association commends President Trump and his administration for the announcement that the FDA will remove all non-tobacco flavored e-cigarettes from the marketplace. We believe this is a vital and positive step to address the youth e-cigarette epidemic, and we urge FDA and Congress to act. The second health crisis is the current cluster of pulmonary illnesses related to vaping. As we've heard today, CDC and state and local health departments are conducting an ongoing investigation of these pulmonary-related illnesses due to vaping. Both crises are caused by the failure of two different administrations to fully implement the Tobacco Control Act of 2009 and protect the public health. The delay in FDA implementing the Tobacco Control Act has left unregulated products with unknown chemicals on the market. Some of the chemicals found in e-cigarettes are carcinogenic. Will the use of e-cigarettes cause cancer? Will the inhalation of chemicals in e-cigarettes cause lung diseases such as COPD? How do e-cigarettes impact people with asthma? And the latest question is, what will be the long-term health consequences of those who have been hospitalized as a result of the pulmonary vaping illness outbreak? In 1964, the Surgeon General released the first report on health hazards of smoking, concluding that smoking cigarettes cause lung cancer. 50 years later, the Surgeon General's report in 2014 added even more smoking-related diseases. It's hard to predict the possible health consequences we will see in another 50 years in the result of e-cigarettes. We are very troubled by what we see so far. E-cigarettes contain nicotine. In addition to being extremely addictive, it can increase blood pressure, heart rate, and according to CDC, nicotine use among youth, adults can alter brain development, cause memory and learning problems. Two of the other primary ingredients found in e-cigarettes, propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, can expose users to high levels of toxins, and these harmful chemicals can cause irreversible lung and heart disease. Flavors attract kids, which is why the American Lung Association has long advocated for the removal of flavored tobacco products from the market. According to a study from the Journal of the American Medical Association, 81% of youth who have ever used tobacco products initiated with a flavored product. The American Lung Association believes everyone who uses tobacco products can quit if they use proven, safe, and effective drugs by the FDA. The FDA has not found any e-cigarette to be safe and effective in helping smokers quit. We are often asked about a study from earlier this year in the New England Journal of Medicine comparing e-cigarettes to nicotine replacement therapy. In this study, over 90% of the smokers using nicotine replacement therapy quit smoking, ending their nicotine addiction entirely. In contrast, 80% of the smokers given e-cigarettes did not quit, but switched and instead remained addicted to e-cigarettes and therefore nicotine. Switching is not quitting. Quitting means ending your addiction to nicotine, which can be very difficult. I have patients who have switched e-cigarettes believing they had quit. Some remain addicted to nicotine, some have been dual users, and some have returned to regular cigarettes. In conclusion, the American Lung Association supports President Trump's call to clear the markets of flavored e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes, as they now exist, have not been shown to be safe. They're responsible for the possible loss of another generation of American youth to tobacco use, death, and disease. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'll be happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Rizzo. Next, we have Mrs. Johnson. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Ruby Johnson, and I'm a mother of 7 children, ranging from an 18-year-old college freshman all the way down to a 5-year-old kindergartner from New Lenox, Illinois. I'm here to tell you about the biggest blessing in my life, which is the fact that my oldest child is still alive. As you'll hear, that could have easily not been the case. On August 16th, I loaded up our daughter and all the makings of a dorm room to drive her from Illinois to Colorado to begin her freshman year of college. As we set out, she began to cough, to complain of pain in her chest when she took a deep breath, and to shiver like she was running a fever. She also admitted to me that she had been vaping. What started as an exciting rite of passage turned into a terrifying near-death experience that involved a week-long hospital stay where my daughter went from a healthy, vibrant patient who needed rapidly increasing amounts of oxygen and medications to treat her declining health. When we arrived in her college town, we went directly to the hospital. She was nauseous, tachycardic, coughing, running a high fever, couldn't take a deep breath without intense pain, and struggled to keep her oxygen saturation up to even the mid-80s. A CT scan showed what the doctors called a diffuse pneumonia all over her lungs. Though antibiotics appropriate for pneumonia were started immediately, her condition continued to worsen as her oxygen needs increased steadily, and she was transferred to the ICU in case more extreme measures to help her became necessary. With every doctor came the same question: have you traveled out of the country recently? Have you had a cold? And the million-dollar question, are you a smoker? The answer to all those questions was no. Finally, they asked, how about e-cigarettes? Her answer to that question was yes, though it wasn't until we got to the third doctor to see her that it actually seemed to be taken seriously. It was that doctor who paid attention to the fact that she said she had been vaping and that she was now experiencing symptoms that matched with the newly reported cases of a mysterious lung illness popping up. He did his research by contacting doctors and hospitals that had already seen similar cases in order to determine the best course of treatment. I'll never forget watching her cry that she literally couldn't breathe without excruciating pain as she was pumped full of IV fluids, antibiotics, steroids, pain meds, anti-nausea meds, and a diuretic to clear fluid from her badly inflamed lungs. She couldn't even get up to walk to the bathroom without her alarm screaming because her oxygen saturation was dipping so low. Her belly was dark purple from the nightly injections they gave her to prevent blood clots as she lay in a hospital bed. Our daughter ended up being one of the lucky ones in this case because she got to leave the hospital and can breathe without supplemental oxygen, but it could have so easily been a totally different tragic outcome. Her pulmonologist said that he feared had we waited another 24 hours to seek medical attention, she'd most likely have been unresponsive on a ventilator. We're so grateful that she received the care she did, though we don't know what the future holds in terms of permanent damage. It's hard enough to be a parent in today's world. We all know that teenagers will inevitably make bad choices and we hope they learn from them, but it's scary to think that there's an industry full of largely unregulated products with zero long-term health studies that are so attractive and easily accessible to youth. The e-cigarette industry has actively targeted our kids through social media campaigns, advertising on Quizlet, a popular homework site for younger kids, and through flavors that were clearly created to appeal to young people. This committee knows better than anyone how youth have been fooled into believing these products are safe by companies that act as if they could care less about their health and well-being of these kids. Consequently, we have the most serious adolescent public health crisis our country's faced in decades. These products are designed to be hidden from parents and teachers, and they accomplish that well. With smells and vapors that disappear as quickly as they appear, and devices that look like flash drives and Apple Watches, it would seem we're fighting a losing battle. You may have read Juul CEO Kevin Burns address this epidemic in the recent Time magazine article by saying, blank happens. Well, blank happened to my family, and I'm joining the movement of moms who, as parents against vaping e-cigarettes, that are designed to be secretive, and it's time we do something about it. This goes beyond party lines because these are all of our children.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Ms. Porter, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name's Vicki Porter. I'm from Lake Mills, Wisconsin. I'm 51 years old. I started smoking cigarettes in college. You know what? I even remember the evening I started smoking. I just gotten dressed to go out and I was listening to jazz records, drinking Irish coffee. I spotted a pack of Benson and Hedges ultralights that a friend had left behind in my dorm room. So feeling invincible, I took out one of those cigarettes and I lit it. Because what goes better with whiskey and jazz, right, than a cigarette? In just a few weeks, I was addicted to cigarettes and began a lifestyle of smoking that lasted for 23 years. After a few years of this smoking lifestyle, I realized it's not cool. It was revolting and embarrassing and deadly. But quitting smoking is very, very, very hard. Nobody tells you that. Over the years, I tried to quit many times using many techniques. I tried cold turkey, nicotine gum, nicotine patches, all approved by the FDA. I tried 2 FDA-approved drugs, even tried one of those drugs twice. I tried hypnosis twice. I tried some acupuncture, all failures. By now, I was around 40 years old, and I figured I just learned to live, to be content, to die a smoker, probably gasping for air like my grandmother and mother did when they died of lung cancer. Years ago now, a coworker of mine showed me an online ad for e-cigarettes. The promise was smoking without the harm or smell. So I ordered one because I thought, what if it's real? What if it's real? And as it turns out, it's actually real. Around 2010, I stopped smoking only because of e-cigarettes. It literally changed and probably saved my life. 9 years later, my doctor says my lungs are healthy. I can climb stairs without being winded. I exercise 4 times a week. I can walk for miles and miles. I can do things now I haven't done since before my lungs became overwhelmed with the filth and deadly toxicity of cigarettes. Vaping is a health miracle to me because without it, I'd probably be on my way to a lung cancer diagnosis. 2 main reasons why e-cigarettes work. First, the inhalation of a far less harmful, not safe, but less harmful nicotine dose similar to smoking, without the deadly toxins caused by burning tobacco. And second, and this is critically important, flavors. Flavors matter to me, an adult ex-smoker. Flavors are not an industry-driven innovation. They are a user-driven innovation. Big Tobacco didn't come up with the idea of flavors. Consumers, adult smokers like me, came up with the idea of flavors. We demanded it. The tobacco flavors that everybody seems to think are so wonderful of the early e-cigarettes were awful. Those flavors mimic the taste of a cigarette and were poor imitations of the cigarettes we actually like to smoke. We don't want our vapor to taste like cigarettes. We're trying to quit them. We want something that tastes good, that makes us want to keep vaping. Flavors keep us vaping. Flavors keep us not smoking. I took a survey on my Facebook page of ex-smokers turned vapors. About 150 people left comments, and I admit this is not scientific, but at last count, approximately 90% use flavors other than tobacco. These are middle-aged and older ex-smokers. These flavors are demanded by adults, sold by adults, consumed by adults. And we're not alone. According to a recent survey of more than 69,000 vapors, 92% preferred non-tobacco flavors. Now, much has been made of the lung illnesses tied to vaping, but it's manifestly dishonest to blame e-cigarettes and nicotine liquid for these illnesses. All available information overwhelmingly suggests the lung diseases being diagnosed have exactly nothing to do with nicotine vapor products and everything to do with adulterated street drugs or products, notably oil-based THC. I've now been vaping for 9 years, and I've never been healthier. And none of the nicotine vapor products that I use contain oil. E-cigarettes are a public health miracle that America is about to squander based on misinformation and disinformation. So let me remind the committee members of a few points. The FDA and local agencies, communities, and parents absolutely need to do a better job of enforcing existing laws and obligations to see to it that kids don't use e-cigarettes. But you don't need to ban the product to make progress on that mission. In 2018, the UK's Royal College of Physicians published a comprehensive scientific report which concluded that vaping nicotine can eliminate almost all the harm from smoking cigarettes and recommended promoting the use of e-cigarettes to smokers as widely as possible. The report also indicated that vaping nicotine is at least 95% less harmful than smoking. Public Health England concurs. Even the American Cancer Society is beginning to understand the promise of tobacco harm reduction, stating that e-cigarettes are, quote, likely to be significantly less harmful for adults than smoking regular cigarettes, and they encourage adults who have failed other FDA-approved methods to switch to e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes were the only thing that worked for me to quit smoking. This product probably saved my life. Vaping has helped more than 8 million adult smokers quit completely when all other options failed for them. I think that's incredible. 8 million people quit smoking. On behalf of former smokers, I hope you'll reject the general war on vaping, and I encourage you to proceed with these comments in mind. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. I need to correct the record on a couple things that were just said. There is no evidence to suggest that e-cigarettes are safe or even safer than cigarettes. That's why the FDA just released their regulations directed at Juul. Secondly, the CDC just came in and presented evidence that they don't know the cause of the current outbreak and did not rule out nicotine e-cigarettes.
May I respond?
No. We are about to start questioning and you can respond then.
Okay.
I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm sorry, Ms. Wasserman Schultz for 5 minutes first.
I thank the chairman for his indulgence. Dr. Ezeki and Dr. Rizzo, and to all the panelists, thank you for joining us. Specifically, my initial question is directed at the two experts in public health. Is there any evidence, and I'm asking you the same question that I asked Dr. Schuchat, is there any evidence that nicotine addiction is harmful to an individual's health? And are there any health benefits at all, including the reduction of the likelihood of smoking cigarettes, to inhaling nicotine on a short-term or long-term basis?
There is no evidence that nicotine is harmful at all to young kids or their developing brains.
Dr. Rizzo?
I agree with that. What was the second part of your question? Or
Is there any evidence that nicotine addiction is harmful to an individual's health?
it is harmful, yes.
Individuals of any age?
Yes, nicotine by itself affects the vascular system, blood pressure, heart rate, and can cause heart and lung disease by itself, especially in the elderly.
And do we have evidence that that is further complicated by the other chemicals that combined with nicotine that are utilized in a vaping product?
I was referring mainly to nicotine by itself, but certainly when it's combined with other ingredients in a vaping product.
The accelerants,
Yes.
the chemicals, I mean, it's not just nicotine that is
Correct.
inhaled when using a vaping product. And are there negative health impacts, including the potential for death, to the combination of chemicals in vaping?
Yes.
Thank you. The CDC has identified 530 cases of lung illness associated with the use of e-cigarette products in 38 states and 1 U.S. territory. It is important that we hear from partners like you at the state level, collaborating with the federal government to stop what is a national outbreak of lung illness. Dr. Ezeki, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Thank you. Illinois and Wisconsin were the first states to identify the outbreak and to spearhead investigations in July when e-cigarette-related lung disease sprung up in your states. Can you describe the severity of those initial cases and why your state felt compelled to act so swiftly? And as your office continues to collaborate with CDC, what steps has Illinois taken to identify all possible e-cigarette-related lung disease incidents even prior to this summer's outbreak?
Thank you for that question. So unfortunately, we did find ourselves at the epicenter of this outbreak. And because of the alert that the Wisconsin Department of Health had released, people were in tuned to the possibility of these illnesses that were not well described, but had a connection between young, healthy people without a reason otherwise to fall so sick, who presented with severe respiratory illnesses and had a connection with vaping. So when our first case came, was reported to the Department of Public Health, we didn't waste any time. And we were able to send out alerts to the medical professionals, sending alerts out to pulmonologists, hospitals, ER doctors, pediatricians, to alert everyone and encourage them to report any suspicious cases directly through their local departments, which would then come to the State Department. So putting out press releases, putting out information on our social media, connecting with the State Board of Education, working with our advocates in the community who put messaging out to doctors.
I just want to piggyback on my question because I'm running a little bit short on time. You conducted detailed interviews of those struck by the disease. Right. 61% of the people you interviewed reported using nicotine e-cigarettes, and nearly 20% of them were using only nicotine e-cigarettes. Many did also report THC use. Is it safe to say that you cannot rule out any nicotine e-cigarettes or any THC products as contributing factors to the outbreak.
That is correct.
And your advice, like the CDC, has been for people to not use any e-cigarette products. I assume a decision like that is not made lightly. Can you tell us how you decided that recommendation was necessary for the public health?
As a role to protect the public, not knowing what the actual etiology is, but knowing that the only commonality among all of our 69 cases was vaping, we know that something with the vaping activity, whether the product device, the brand, something therein is the culprit. And without knowing specifically, it seems safer to give a broader warning until we could get more information out.
And lastly, before my time expires, reports show that e-cigarette aerosol, which is present in all types of vaping, is not harmless. Why is e-cigarette aerosol dangerous to individuals that vape?
The chemicals within the aerosol are usually irritants to the lungs. The lung then responds with different kinds of reactions that we're seeing in some of the patients, which obviously affects the oxygenation, which is the primary function of the lung, which sometimes results in needing a breathing machine to now perform that process of oxygenation.
Thank you. And I know my time's expired, but I do just want to confirm my understanding is that the testimony of Ms. Porter is anecdotal, related specifically to her opinion, and that she is not a public health expert.
Thank you. I think that's correct.
Okay.
I now
I yield back.
recognize Congressman Grothman for 5 minutes of questioning.
First of all, Doctor, forgot, Zeke. Okay. Are these I know you've recently legalized marijuana in the state of Illinois. Are these cartridges, are THC cartridges now legal in Illinois under the new law or not?
So THC cartridges are legal through the Medical Cannabis Act. So for patients who are on the medical cannabis program, THC cartridges are available.
You think that was a mistake?
I beg your pardon?
You think that was a mistake?
We have no cases of our 69 cases in Illinois that are from the registry of medical cannabis patients.
Well, I'm sure they're not registered, but once you make these things legal, there's certainly more of them out there, that sort of thing. It implies they're okay.
And again, we're still waiting to identify the exact etiology. So,
okay, again, you mentioned that in your study, 80% of the people who have a health problem self-reported that they had some THC in there. But as I asked the last panel, I assume people don't usually admit that they're doing something illegally. If 80% admitted that they were using a product with THC in it, is it possible that the actual number is higher, significantly higher?
the numbers could be higher, but we have interviewed and re-interviewed the patients. It wasn't a single go-round. So there have been persistent conversations with these people, and so people have reported more use.
Now, Ms. Porter, you wanted to respond to some of the other congressmen. I'd like to give you an opportunity to say what you wanted to say.
Well, what I wanted to say was, with regard to the chairman's comments that there's no evidence that e-cigarettes are less harmful, that's just simply not true. It was a comprehensive scientific report that was generated by the United Kingdom's Royal College of Physicians. It wasn't just an opinion. It wasn't anecdotal, as it were. It was actually a scientific report. Also, and I'm not sure how many people had a chance to see this on CBS This Morning last week, Dr. David Abrams from the NYU College of Global Public Health indicated that abundant evidence exists that the cancer biomarkers associated with e-cigarettes are vastly lower than the ones that are associated with smoking. I would also like to ask if somebody could please answer me this particular question. What is the particular mechanism by which PG and VG could possibly cause disease? I recall Dr. Rizzo said something about PG and VG causing disease. What is the particular mechanism that vegetable glycerin or propylene glycol actually could cause disease?
I don't think you're supposed to answer questions, but I'll ask that question of Dr. Could you respond?
Well, the short answer, but I'll expand, is that we really don't know anything about these devices because they haven't been studied in any rigorous manner. When you heat a substance up to the temperatures that e-cigarettes do, you no longer have the same properties of the compound that we knew before. A compound that could have been ingested safely is now being vaporized and inhaled into the lungs, which is a much different part of the body than the stomach. So in short, we don't know the toxins, what the toxins are doing. We know toxins are created. And even if we say toxins are less than cigarettes, that's a very low bar to beat. And 7,000 chemicals in tobacco means there's still 350 in 5% of e-cigarettes.
Ms. Porter, if we banned e-cigarettes or you're no longer able to get them, it's obviously important for you not to smoke. What would you do? What would be your fallback position?
If I may, the 7,000 chemicals that the doctor was talking about are actually are the chemicals that are generated when tobacco is burnt. The nicotine extracted from tobacco does not generate 7,000 chemicals in a 5% solution in e-liquid. That's when you actually light something on fire and inhale the particulate matter, the carbon monoxide, the various carcinogens into your lungs. I know this because I smoked and I decided to learn about it. What would I do? I would probably just find a way to get my e-cigarettes. That's what I would do. That's me though. I'm a very knowledgeable user and I'm a very knowledgeable navigator of this marketplace. I'd probably order from China. Most people, and in fact, anecdotally again, but most people that I have spoken to who vape would just simply go back to smoking. Because the reason we're vaping instead of smoking is because all of the FDA approved quit methods have failed for us multiple times. That's the short answer. I would probably order from China, but other people would probably start smoking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grothman. I am going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Dr. Rizzo, could you care to respond to the claim that e-cigarettes are safer than combustible cigarettes?
Yes, the quote about the United Kingdom's decision that 95% safer than tobacco. If you read the articles about how that decision was made, a group of experts got together for 2 days in Europe. Several of those experts admitted to be working for the vaping industry, and the European Respiratory Society, the Lancet editorial, and 14 professional societies in this country wrote letters to the United Kingdom saying they don't agree with that public health decision. And also in the United Kingdom, there's a much different aspect of e-cigarettes. They're controlled and regulated much more strictly than this country. The tobacco flavors are not there. So you really can't compare what happens in England to this country, and it really is faulty science that it was based on.
Right, so that was a bogus study. What's the nicotine levels that are allowed for nicotine e-cigarettes in UK versus in America?
I can get the exact number. I think 18 to 20 milligrams is the most that's recommended in an e-cigarette in England, but
And here it's 59?
I believe it correct, yes.
So roughly almost 3 times the amount of nicotine here in the US in any e-cigarette pod compared to in Britain. Now, Mrs. Johnson, I want to ask you a couple questions. How old is your daughter now?
She's 18.
And when did she first start vaping?
After all this happened, she told us that she tried it the first time when she was a sophomore in high school, and that she had tried it on and off for about 18 months before she became ill.
And what devices had she been vaping?
She started using a Juul, and the vast majority of what she used was nicotine e-cigarette. She did try vaping THC as well, and used mostly nicotine in the weeks leading up to her illness.
Now, Mrs. Johnson, I presume, how is she doing now?
She's doing better. She's, adjusting to life as a college freshman. She's still out of breath, when she's got to walk quickly or far, and we'll just kind of see what the future holds for her.
So are you saying that there's some kind of permanent injury associated with what happened due to the vaping?
Unfortunately, with this being such a new thing, the doctors can't really make any promises that there won't be permanent damage. So we'll just continue to follow up with repeat CT scans of her lungs and see what that reveals as time goes on.
And how did she first begin vaping in high school?
She said that a friend offered it to her to try, They're passed around, the bathrooms, it's in the high schools, even the junior highs. I've got 2 sons in high school as well, and it's kind of common for the high schoolers to refer to the bathroom as the jewel room because that's what goes on in there most.
Now, 28% of high schoolers today are vaping, and 5% of middle schoolers are vaping. What do you say to parents who are concerned about their children getting hooked on e-cigarettes?
Well, I think that it's super important to keep the conversation open. And as parents, we have to ask questions. But the problem is that so many of us don't know what to look for. So I feel like it's also important that we work together with our schools to educate parents with what these devices actually look like, what the signs could be that your child is vaping, and to educate ourselves and our kids.
And you said mint flavor was one of the ones that got her hooked, correct?
Yeah, and after, and she's been super honest as this has all happened because she's terrified, and she's said, I'll never touch a vape again, but she said that mint was her favorite.
You were very close to losing your daughter, correct?
That's correct.
And before they correctly diagnosed what was happening, did you come up with the idea that it was the e-cigarettes, or how did they arrive at the question of asking about e-cigarettes?
Well, I think the timing really worked in our favor because there was just enough talk of what was going on and enough cases out there that it was on my radar. I had seen the news articles. Like I said, she was 100% honest, so she mentioned it to every doctor, but it wasn't until we got to the 3rd doctor that it was really paid attention to. And I remember this night where she cried to her nurse saying, it hurts so bad, I can't take a deep breath. And the nurse reached out to the doctor and he said that since he had admitted her, he was trying to reach out to other hospitals and doctors. And that was when, they had us wearing a mask at first thinking it was pneumonia. And that was when the masks came off. And they said, I think this is what we're dealing with.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you.
I'd like to now recognize Ranking Member Cloud for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Rizzo, could you enlighten us a little bit on the distinction between infectious disease and chemical exposure as it relates to lung injury?
Sure. When someone presents with the symptoms that were mentioned, it could be a bacterial or a viral pneumonia, meaning that the organism's gotten into the lung, the immune system has led to the cells of the body going to the lung to try to fight off that infection. Basically, that's inflammation. And when that occurs in the lung, and depending on the intensity that it occurs in the lung, it will fill the normal air spaces with fluid, pus, inflammatory cells, and therefore the ability to get oxygen into the bloodstream is diminished. So when it's an infection, you can usually culture that media, whether it's sputum or whether a tube is put down in the lung and aspirated fluid out. You culture that, you look for organisms under the microscope. Once that's ruled out, the inflammation must be being caused by something else. And in situations like this is where the history is very important. You have to find out what could they have been exposed to. And in this case, the right questioning and putting 2 and 2 together, doctors started to realize there was a commonality in the process of vaping something.
This has been touched on already, but could you explain specifically why it's much more of an issue for young people to start vaping?
The young people seem to start vaping more than the adults because of the flavors. Most smokers...
From a health perspective, what does it do to their body?
Flavors, the inhalation into the lung does a couple different things. First of all, the lung doesn't reach its full development until about mid-20s. So you're dealing with a population where the lungs are still growing and developing. All of a sudden now you're having an insult of inflammation, you're changing the immune system, and now the body has to try to compensate for that and recover from that, but has lost ground with regard to what ultimately that lung development is going to be. So in cases like you've heard about, this population will need to be monitored and followed for any permanent damage that may occur.
And Dr. Ezekiel, could you explain kind of the legal framework in Illinois right now as it relates to teen vaping? Is it illegal for people under?
Right. So we actually have tobacco 21. So it is illegal to use products under the age of 21.
Okay. And Ms. Johnson, first of all, as a mom of 7 children, kudos. I have a number of parenting questions that are not appropriate for the setting, but and happy to hear your daughter's doing well. Do you know where she was obtaining the product from?
I do know that, so she turned 18 in December, and so there was a small period of time where it was legal for her to buy vaping products. And I do know that she obtained some from a local store. I am also fairly certain that that store continued to sell to her after the Tobacco 21 law was passed in July, and she was no longer legally buying them.
Okay.
So yeah, like I said, there's a way for the kids to buy them, but also they're being passed around in schools, it's a huge problem. I mean, we're scared enough as parents, but our poor educators are drowning because these products are not only accessible to the kids, but they're very discreet.
And you mentioned a mix of legitimate and illegitimate product. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Dr. Ezekiel, what's being done because I just mentioned we have a store that was a bad actor. We have people who are getting minors product in the schools bad actor. What's being done on the enforcement end to prosecute bad actors in Illinois?
So not exactly within our realm, but we are working with the Illinois State Police, and they are very much on top of this issue, and they are going to step up enforcement in terms of...
Has anyone been charged or?
No one has been charged as far as I know, but they are going to step up sending people in to as decoys to come in and try to purchase the products who don't look of age and seeing if they're getting carded. So those investigations and that enforcement is going to be stepped up.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Porter, you've used e-cigarettes for a long time. What kind of regulation do you think is appropriate?
I've used e-cigarettes for 9 years, and just to kind of bring a point, there are 11 million regular e-cigarette users who are adults and obtaining these products legally. And I also want to say that the products that I have been vaping for 9 years are not 59 milligrams, or 12 milligrams. I think that regarding the product, the manufacturing of the product, insisting on good manufacturing practices, GMP, is something that is important, and that is something that I look for in the products that I purchase as someone who has, making sure that nothing gets adulterated, that there isn't cross-contamination in the production of the product. With regard to kids, I think we don't even talk much about enforcement. In the state of Wisconsin, police would send decoys in to see if young people could potentially buy a pack of cigarettes. Stores were fined substantially if they violated that. Same with underage drinking. We did the same thing. And that kind of regular enforcement, I think, is something that is quite important, that doesn't seem to really be a priority is folks are fully, neck deep in the panic about vaping. But again, I point out that if you get rid of flavors from vaping or vapor products, then you are stranding 8 million people at least who are ex-smokers, and 11 million people from access to products that work so that they don't pick up a pack of cigarettes. With regard to advertising, I think I made a note here. Hoodies? I mean, who makes this garbage? This kind of stuff, obviously, if it is marketed directly to children, it's appalling. There isn't a single person who uses a vapor product who is an adult who thinks it's appropriate for young people, freshmen, 9th graders or 8th graders or 6th graders to be able to pass around vapor products. And I also think that we need to really understand here that it appears from all indications, and no, we don't have evidence, but from all indications, these diseases, which are, and I don't want one of these diseases, by the way. I don't want to suddenly wake up one day and not be able to breathe. That's why I quit smoking.
Your time is up. Thank you so much.
But I do think that we can do something about the adulterated products on the streets.
Thank you. Congresswoman Presley, you have 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. An NIH-funded study found that over 8,000 e-liquid flavors are currently on the market. Some of these flavors include banana pudding, rainbow candy, and Hawaiian punch. Dr. Rizzo, do we know how many of these 8,000 flavors have been tested for toxicity?
The one study I know was done at the Harvard School of Public Health, Chan School of Public Health. They looked at about 51 different flavors, and 47 of those flavors did have chemicals in them that they felt were toxic to the lung. I don't know about any other larger studies at this point.
47 out of 51.
Out of 51, I believe was the number, yes.
All right. And Dr. Ezike, you have collected samples of the products that were used by victims of the outbreak, and those are in the process of being tested, correct?
That's correct. They are with the FDA, and we're waiting for those results.
And as you search for the cause of the outbreak, you have not ruled out components of flavors as possible contributing factors to the outbreak, have you?
That is correct. We have not ruled that out.
Dr. Ezike, are any e-cigarettes approved by the FDA as smoking cessation devices?
No, they are not.
Dr. Ezike, e-cigarette companies have been allowed to apply for FDA approval as smoking cessation devices for years, but they have not done so, have they?
They have not.
Getting approval would require proving e-cigarettes work for smoking cessation, and manufacturers haven't even conducted the clinical trials to back up that central claim.
That's correct.
So, Ms. Porter, I'm grateful for every one adult smoker that e-cigarettes are actually helping to quit nicotine. But for every one adult smoker that is being helped, 81 kids will be introduced to nicotine through e-cigarettes and graduate to cigarette addiction as an adult. None of us want that.
And that's an impossible statistic. There are 11 million vapors.
Claiming
There
my
are
time.
11 million vapors.
Claiming my time, I was just making a
Ms.
statement.
Porter,
I actually
please.
wasn't posing a question to you.
Please let Ms. Presley finish her question.
So I just didn't want to take away from your own personal experience. So now I'll get to Dr. Rizzo. So we have seen no evidence that e-cigarettes are useful for smoking cessation. In fact, dual use is significantly more prevalent. Is dual use safe?
No.
If someone cuts back on cigarettes and adds vaping, is that safe?
No.
Dr. Rizzo, even if e-cigarettes were useful for cessation, have you seen any evidence that adults who want to use them for that purpose would refuse to use tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes?
No.
I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Presley. Ms. Congresswoman Miller for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Krishnamurthy. I want to thank all of you for being here today. This is very important. And Ms. Johnson, thank you for sharing your story, and I hope your daughter is continued to recover, particularly after listening to Dr. Rizzo say that our lungs continue to form into our 20s. I think that's a positive, and I hope and pray that she gets better.
Thank you.
Dr. Rizzo, is nicotine addictive?
Yes, definitely.
Is it also a depressant?
It actually has two phases. It can initially be a stimulant, and then it can be depressive. It's a chemical that acts as a neurotransmitter in our body. The acetylcholine receptors, which are called nicotinic and muscarinic receptors, they're all affected by nicotine.
People have been smoking for centuries, haven't they?
Yes.
And it wasn't until the 60s when they finally came out and established that it caused cancer.
Yes.
I also remember in the early 60s, trucks putting out vapor with DDT driving around my neighborhood and children riding bicycles behind the truck because they thought that was really neat. Were there ever any studies done to see if DDT caused cancer?
I would have to look, but I suspect it was looked at as a inhaled toxin, but I don't know the details on that right now, but I can get back to you on that.
And that was another vapor that they put out. I vividly remember that happening. Ms. Porter, you said you smoked for 20-some years?
23.
When you started, did you just think that was really cool?
Sure did. Thought it was the coolest thing. I thought I'm listening to jazz and drinking whiskey and smoking a cigarette.
Yeah. I remember, movies about World War II and everybody had a cigarette hanging out of their mouth. And the message was just that was a cool thing to happen in the 50s and 60s. And
My movie was House of Games. That was my movie.
I don't know that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay. And you are concerned about youth using e-cigarettes?
Absolutely. I'm concerned about youth using e-cigarettes. I'm concerned about youth smoking, which is, it's an amazing statistic that now youth smoking is so low. And then after today's testimony from multiple witnesses, I'm now very concerned at the 12.5% of youth who are saying that they're using pot. But yes, the youth, kids are going to do things that are risky, but we should try to make sure that they don't make dumb choices like I did when I was, 18 or 19 years old.
Well, I remember our next door neighbor had a catawba tree, and the kids thought it'd be really cool to light those long cigar looking things that really smelled terrible. Once you went to e-cigarettes, did you ever notice how bad your clothing smelled, or how bad your hair smelled, or your house?
Yeah, oh, sure. And within about 2 weeks of switching to e-cigarettes, I couldn't tolerate the smell of smoking. I couldn't tolerate the smell of somebody who had been smoking an hour earlier. I became one of those people who just became an annoying ex-smoker. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, it's very obvious. The more obvious change, though, came about 3 months after I'd begun vaping. And just to see, I went to go to my physician and asked for a chest x-ray to see if I had done permanent damage. I wanted to know if I was going to be sick and die, potentially of lung cancer, if I had the beginnings of COPD.
Did you, in 3 months, did you think your lungs were going to change?
Yeah, because I felt so much better. And my doc said, your lungs are pretty clear. And I said, well, good, because I quit smoking. She said, I can tell.
Well, you mentioned a much lesser amount of nicotine in the e-cigarettes. Is there a step down that if you were there is smoker to?
There's a lot of there's a lot of misunderstanding of what the marketplace is for the vapor products, the liquid itself. It can go from 0 milligrams of nicotine to as with some of the what they call salts, to as high as potentially 60 milligrams of nicotine. People like me, I don't use salts. I use just regular old-fashioned e-liquid. I use 12 milligrams. Depending on the device, there are multiple different types of devices you can use. I can use as little as 3 milligrams of nicotine in e-liquid. And yes, you can absolutely, there are multiple different variations in concentration of the liquid itself.
So it would be possible that you could step down and totally get off of
People do it all the time. In fact, on my Facebook page, when I asked for some stories, multiple people said I began at 18, I stepped down to 12, I went down to 9, and then I was at 0. Some people are still vaping 0. Some people just decided to use that 0 point to quit vaping as well.
I didn't realize my time was up. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Miller. Now I'd recognize Congresswoman Tlaib for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all so much for being here and for contributing to this important conversation. As a mother, thank you, Ms. Johnson, for coming here. I know it's not easy. Even for me, speaking publicly to this day, my stomach turns. So I know how hard it is, especially something so personal. So I really do appreciate you being here. E-cigarettes were allowed onto the market without fully understanding the long-term effects and without regulation, as you all know. Their safety wasn't tested yet. Big tobacco companies like Juul touted their products as safe and certainly safer than cigarettes. They even sent representatives into schools to tell students that it's, quote, I continue to repeat it because it's obvious they're tailoring it towards our kids, quote, totally safe. The result is that e-cigarette use took off. Now 27.5% of high school kids use e-cigarettes, and those kids are used as guinea pigs. We are just now beginning to find out the health risks they pose. Risks like those those that are suffering right now from it, and the outbreak of lung disease and so forth. In fact, most e-cigarettes hold and discharge numerous other potentially toxic substances, such as, I'm going to try to pronounce this, formaldehyde. Yes, thank you. And a compound named benzene, which is found in car exhaust systems. Dr. Rizzo, yes or no, is it safe to inhale these liquids contained inside e-cigarettes directly into your lungs?
No.
Dr. Rizzo, what are the outcomes of inhaling such toxic substances, and are there any links to lung damage or heart disease? Are there any studies regarding the health risks associated with vaping?
There are no long-term studies since it has only been in the marketplace here for about 9 to 10 years.
Yes. Likewise, the cigarette smoking process requires the user to inhale ultra-fine particles that could possibly irritate their throat, eyes, and airways. Dr. Rizzo, could these particles exacerbate respiratory alignments that affect our breathing?
Particularly the ultrafine particles are very similar to the small particles that are talked about in air pollution. So they definitely get into the lung, into the bloodstream. It can affect the cardiovascular system in the lungs.
Thank you. Very little is definitely known about the long-term health effects of e-cigarettes use in vaping, but there is a conscience as to nicotine's dangerous effects on development of adolescent brain and increased risk of future addiction. Dr. Ezeki, can you explain how nicotine impacts brain development in adolescents?
So of course, the brain is still developing almost until age 26. And with nicotine, the receptors in pediatrics, they are more susceptible to being addicted. So they get addicted quicker, and the addictions predisposed to future addictions down the road. So we have seen that people who have worse addictions usually started at earlier ages.
And this is very scary. And as a mom, I hope e-cigarette users are aware of this fact and are not waiting for government to declare this kind of a national crisis right now, right? That we already know from just as mere hospitalization cases like in your daughter's case and so forth, that it's unsafe. We've heard today vaping exposes users to harmful chemicals and so forth. I go in to speak to kids all the time. Do the second grade and third grade reading class. They always ask, well, what do you do? And I tell them I work at the Capitol, and I show them the picture and tell them where it is geography wise. And then I tell them, when I was your age, I used to go to restaurants with my parents, and they say, right now you go, and they say, how many people in your group? When I was little, they said non-smoking or smoking section. And the kids are like, what? And I was like, yeah, they would say non-smoking or smoking because they smoked in cigarettes in public places like restaurants, hospitals, schools, planes, and the kids' eyes are wide and they're like, what? That's unbelievable. And I said, yes, even though people were saying secondhand smoking was worse than directly smoking cigarettes. And even though health experts and others were coming forward, you had big industry, corporate greed, misleading information out there to the public, what the real impact was on health. And so it's so important that you all continue to speak truth about this because the long-term effects is very dangerous, especially because they have been targeted towards youth. And then, Ms. Porter, I was reading because I want to know more about you and your beliefs, and I respect that. We all have different beliefs, but you call yourself a converted conservative and reformed Marxist. Are you a conspiracy theorist?
I think my politics are entirely irrelevant to this hearing.
Oh, okay. Why were you winking at one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle? You winked.
Because I know Glenn Grothman.
Oh, that's what so the winking, did he?
He introduced me.
Oh,
he's a friend of mine.
Okay, understand. I didn't know what the winking was because I thought maybe there was something like a conspiracy thing going on there. I didn't know.
You think there's a conspiracy in this hearing, ma'am?
No, I actually think people are speaking truth here and you can provide information.
May I address the truth?
No.
Well, the truth to you is very different for the majority of people in this room who do believe that children are being
The truth for me is I quit smoking with e-cigarettes and so did 8 million other people.
You're still smoking.
I'm not smoking.
Thank you.
And I'm not lying under oath.
Order, please. I'd like to recognize Congressman Connolly for 5 minutes question.
Thank you. And welcome to our panel. It seems to me that this is a new crisis that kind of came upon us real fast and unawares. And part of the problem is, frankly, the lack of any federal structure in which to look at this issue and leaving states like Illinois kind of on their own. And is that a fair summation of where you think the state of Illinois finds itself, Dr. Z?
I believe that there's always ways for improvement. The support for research around data modernization tools so that we can quickly upload our information and share it across states or with our federal partners is very key to being able to disseminate information faster around these kinds of epidemics as they emerge.
But if the federal government is not regulating the product and hasn't done the research and analysis of pros and cons, dangers, benefits, it kind of leaves you either to do nothing and wait or to try to take some action to protect the citizens of your state. Isn't that fair?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so we have a vacuum at the federal level. Fair enough, Dr. Rizzo?
Yes, I agree.
And what steps should the federal, I mean, this reminds me a little bit of marijuana, where we haven't done our job at the federal level in justifying how we categorize or classify marijuana. We have essentially limited the kinds of studies we sponsor at the federal level and who gets to do them with a clear bias toward it's dangerous. And as a result, we've lost control. So we have 27, 28 states that are moving to legalization in some form, some full legalization for recreational purposes, some for medical purposes. But meanwhile, the federal control is gone. In this case, it's the federal government hasn't even really acted yet. And I just wonder what would be helpful from your point of view for the federal government to undertake so we deal with this obviously in an expeditious way, because you look at smoking, it can take 30, 40, 50 years for somebody to have the negative health impacts of smoking, chronic smoking. What has shocked us about this crisis is that timeline has collapsed. And we're looking at young people who have engaged in vaping, and according to some medical reports, at least anecdotally, their lungs look like that of a chronic smoker of 40 years. How did that happen? What in the world is at work here that could do that? And what must we do to protect the public in an efficacious way and not take 10 years to do it? Dr. Rizzo.
Well, I think the first step with regard to this recent crisis of the vaping illness, everything is being done and will continue to be done by the CDC and the FDA, and we're hoping that they come up with some answers. I think the bigger picture is, should there have been, and we think at the Lung Association, there should have been a pre-market review of any products that come out into the marketplace to deem whether or not they're appropriate for public protection. And I think the lack of that authority by the FDA for multiple reasons has been very slow in developing.
Dr. Ziki, anything?
I do concur with that.
Ms. Johnson, would that have made a difference from your perspective?
I think so. The fact that nobody really knows how these products are going to affect people, especially young people who I understand shouldn't be using them, but have super easy access to them. It's kind of Russian roulette. You just don't know what's going to happen. And with developing lungs, it seems to be even worse.
Yeah. I just ended this note. Sometimes we have mindless debate about regulation, and all of it's bad. And I bring attention to the fact my colleague, Mr. Colmer, Republican, conservative Republican, stated earlier, but sometimes we need it. Mm-hmm. It ain't all bad. And sometimes we need to protect the public. And as you all said, frankly, absent the vacuum that we created, which wasn't deliberate, nobody did it with malice, has cost lives and will cost more. And so we need to be seized with this issue, and we need to understand that meaningful regulation